Hello, everybody, and welcome back to part 3 of Cup of Hemlock Theatre's. Ooh, you're.
Sorry. We were
I
just
thought you were raising your hand to stop me.
stop. It's part 2.
The
No,
three,
we
and
were
Mac's like,
Yeah.
"Wait, what?"
we
We're
were
keeping
just
all this in. This is too much fun. Yes, we are in part 3 of our Fringe Review Roundup. We are a little bit loopy here over at Cup of Hemlock. We've seen over 40 shows and have talked about over half of them, but we still have another batch of roughly 15, 16 to go. So, it's going to be quite a few. But we're going to have a lot of fun doing it. And joining us on this journey is none other than the wonderful Mr. Ryan Borochovitz, my co-artistic producer.
Hello, Mac. How are you doing?
Excellent, excellent, excellent. What is in your cup today, sir?
So once again, I have multiple cups. I do have the cup filled with tea. Very tasty. Still slightly getting over my cold, so
Okay.
tea is always a good choice for that. But because I also need to stay hydrated and will probably run out of breath by the end of this, I got a bottle of water too.
You and Biden both staying very hydrated.
Sure.
And I'll see you wearing your Fringe button, as am I.
Yes.
Mine's
Tip
showing up on the green
Fringe, folks.
screen.
Right. That's
not
fine.
as the actual button. That's okay though. And then of course we have our wonderful co-associate artistic producer, Ms. Jillian Robinson. Hello, Jill.
Hello, the third person on the team. So those listening to the podcast at the top, Ryan and I put up the number 3.
Yeah.
Yes.
For
And
part 3.
For part 3. And I am the third person on this trio of a team.
Yep.
We've got all the vibes going. Yeah. I'm good. I'm good, Mac.
Wonderful. What's in your cup, Jill? What's your ensemble?
Yeah,
today?
my ensemble is just orange and bright. I'm just feeling like in a
Very
bright,
summery.
cheery, summery mood. I've got my mom's old orange 80s earrings that match this.
They're back
shirt
in style.
perfectly. Yeah, so I've got some coffee. And one of my favorite mugs just says like chocolate showed. I just did an interview for the cup, so that mug was in the dishwasher. So I don't have my cup today. But I've got some caramel waffle cookie flavored coffee.
Ooh, that's a fancy one.
Waffle cookie flavored coffee. Listen to that in there. And then I also have water hydration station as always. And as Ryan said, we are going to need to wet our whistle for this episode. So all set there. How are you, Mac?
Yeah,
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful sunny day in the neighborhood. It was a great weekend, and I'm excited to wrap out our Fringe journey for 2024. I mean, this year we were seeing quite a bit, so there was a lot to discuss between the three of us. So very excited to show everybody the last batch. These shows are certainly last and not least at all. These are all wonderful shows. So just because you end up in part 3 doesn't mean you're like bottom right for us.
No, I think also I want to just give a special shout out to Ryan has done a lot of the organizing and jostling of how to do these episodes. So the first part with him and I, the second part was him and Mac, and now it's the three of us. And that took a lot of puzzle piecing of who saw what when and what can be recorded at what time. And Ryan took the full reins on that. So thank you, Ryan, for spearheading the Fringe.
I have a big cork board with lots of red twine, but I figured it out. Swear to
hence
God,
our
if we missed
social
a
media feed this year being corkboard and pinned up shows.
Yes, I noticed that motif. Very clever.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's right. That's right. All right, everybody. Let's get into our first show of the night, which is Patty Picker, which is from 141 Collective and Flying Penguin Theatre. Ryan and Jill, this was your show. So, Ryan, we'll let you start off with a quick kind of intro, classic Ryan Borochovitz summary.
Okay. Patty Picker. This was a delight. The script is written by Evan Bottenheimer. It is directed and produced by Cass Van Wyck, whose work we've often talked about here on the Cup. And it was a two-hander starring Caitlin Race as the titular Patty and Anne Van Leeuwen as everyone else, including characters named Phoebe, Preston, Peter. There's a big P motif in this piece about picking things and a girl named Patty. So I will also say blanket statement. This will be the case with a lot of things. This is another one that I covered for intermission previously. I'm going to try my best to not just repeat all the same points. It was actually the first one that I wrote for them, and I wrote way too much and had to get radically cut down. I think I cut like 1,000 words out of a review that was only supposed to be 300. So there's still plenty to talk about. So our protagonist is Patty. And she is a typical teenage girl. She's in grade 10 and she's going through a bit of a rough patch. Her parents have recently split up and she's living with her well-meaning but kind of dorky dad, who she has a bit of a fraught relationship with. She's in the middle of a stressful political campaign to become her school's grade 10 rep. But one of the things that is going well for her is that she's recently entered a romantic relationship with her best friend Phoebe. But amid all of this, Patty has this dirty little secret that she compulsively picks her nose. She picks her nose when she's happy. She picks her nose when she's sad. She definitely picks her nose when she's nervous. And when her political opponent in the student council election makes an incriminating video of her doing just that, he tries blackmailing her into dropping out of the race. And she's forced to make a difficult choice about what to do, what'll happen if people know where her fingers have been. So that's the kind of blanket summary of this piece here. I thought this was delightful. It was so charming across the board. It's exceptionally well written, well directed, well acted. Caitlin Race anchors the piece as Patty with like an exceptional performance. Everything is so precise, so stylized. And Anne Van Leeuwen does such a good job as everyone else. She only takes like one little proper costume piece to differentiate each of the characters, but her performance is stunning. Everybody is so different and well defined. I thought, yeah, this is such a kind of, very well written, very surprisingly complex piece for a kid. Sorry, Jill, don't let me talk the whole time. Anything you want to jump in?
Keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say the characters are very three-dimensional and fleshed out in this way. And like I kind of tried to allude to this in my intermission piece, but it got very shortened. But Patty herself is sort of this perfect example of what I mean by this three-dimensionality, because she has all these nerdy hobbies. She plays chess, she's into student council, but I would be very reluctant to refer to her as a nerd, if that makes sense. And I think this is like an interesting way that all these characters are archetypes without being stereotypes. I think there's this tendency with fictional characters and with real people to assign categories of identity based on an assemblage of surface level traits. But there's really a complexity going on here that defies this sort of easy labeling. And speaking of her interests, something that I think is really funny is that Phoebe, Patty's girlfriend, loves drama club, but Patty hates it. And I didn't realize this until seeing this, but it's so rare for the protagonist in a kids show, or if we're being honest, any theater show, to dislike theater and not be judged for it, for that opinion, or have that opinion changed by the end. I just thought that was neat. You kind of never see that. Like, it's okay to not like theater in the world of this play. Yeah, I have more I could say, but Jill, I want to hear some of your thoughts too.
Of course. No. I felt the exact same way, Ryan. This is definitely in like my top shows of Fringe. I thought
top picks of the Fringe.
Top picks. And I know right after I saw, Ryan and I saw it on separate days, and I texted you saying, Patty Picker performance, pure perfection. And I went to the Fringe tent later that night and I just noticed all of the words I was using that started with P. Super, super brilliantly written, a phenomenal piece for the Fringe. And again, done at St. Vlad's as part of Kids Fest. I think it's a great show for youngins and high schoolers especially to see and relate to. And it was really refreshing seeing like a show in like a 2024 lens. And I just want to shout out Cass Fenwick. Cass is a friend of mine and ours here at the Cup. The direction of this piece was stunning. So Caitlin Race, who plays Patty, a lot of the script is her monologuing quite a bit as like the transition pieces where she interacts with Anne, who plays all of the other ensemble members of the cast. And just like the usage of the stage space of kind of having Patty plant herself either center stage or on a block, or again, it was very simplistic set dressing. Like we just had some drama boxes. We had the coat rack at the back with all of Anne's different props hung up for easy access of her. And I just thought the way that the performers, and you could tell this was definitely a marriage between performers and the director, of segueing between these transitions and utilizing the sort of like Patty's frenzy. She was able to kind of like run around the space because there wasn't too much set dressing, but then there were focal points for us too. So I just thought it was very cleanly staged. And you could definitely tell, again, that was like a pure marriage of like, especially Cass and Caitlin working on that sort of coordinate. Yeah. And then I guess like special, like Caitlin's gestures and her delivery and her vocal quality, like it was just like top top notch. So enticing to watch. You could tell the show I was at, the audience was with Patty the entire time, and actually had a gentleman in my audience who was quite vocal, gave a lot of vocal reactions, and the gasps were huge gasps, and the laughter was like a huge belly laugh. And I love when audience members are like that, because it livens up everyone else in the theater as well. So we truly felt like we were in the school halls with Patty in the performance that I was at. And massive shout out to Anne, played every character brilliantly. Like when she was dad, she was dad. Like when she was Preston, she was Preston, the opponent, the sort of enemy to Patty. And just, the chemistry between Caitlin and Anne was amazing. Ryan, take back the reins.
Okay. First of all, I will say, I love the relationship between Patty and her dad. It's so sweet. It is reminiscent of Bo Burnham's 8th Grade, but you know what? That's a perfect movie. So, there's worse things to be reminiscent of. But it's just so well handled, so tender in a lot of these moments. Preston is such a funny character with his emotional support dog, who we find out might have another function as well later on in there. But also just the fact that, the antagonist isn't like a typical school bully. He kind of is also someone who we might, in other versions of a story like this, think of being as like a nerdy presence, has a visible disability in some way, and yet everyone in school seems to love him. Like this is a really interestingly textured portrayal of young people.
Definitely.
And like what high schools look like today. The matter-of-fact portrayal of queerness in this piece, I think, is very well done, in a point where because it's so matter-of-fact, it almost seems for a moment like it's a bit of a post-closet interpretation. I've talked about things like that on the Cup before, where I think that is an interesting direction that a lot of children's media is going in, where they're just imagining a world where coming out isn't even required because everyone's so tolerant. But the lack of tolerance is still there, even if it doesn't exist in the high school. With Phoebe's parents in particular, there is like an indication that maybe things aren't quite moving as further into that direction as we'd like. But because everything is so sort of tolerated within the high school itself, I think that matter-of-factness is just a manifestation of where the next generation is going, and how they are kind of taking the reins of just being understanding in this regard. It's just all very well done. And okay, last thing, because we're probably running short on time, right? But Jill, anything else did you want to add before I say the last thing?
I just want to say this is definitely a piece I'd love to see tour like middle school classes, or like grade schools, high schools. I think this script is like absolutely perfect for right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Hit us with your last thought there, right?
Last thing. Shortly before I saw the show, I was telling a friend of ours about what little I knew about the show going in, and she asked an interesting question that hadn't occurred to me. How are they going to stage the nose picking? And I thought, that is an interesting question, because I hadn't really thought about it. But so this whole show is all very stylized. So I'm sure Caitlin was very happy to hear on day one of rehearsal that she didn't actually have to pick her nose on stage. She always says, "Pick my nose," with a stylized upward motion of her index finger. But part of why I feel like this point was bungled up in my intermission piece with all the words that got cut out of it, but part of me kind of wonders if it is a missed opportunity to not have her really pick her nose on stage. I'm not saying that would be fun to watch, but this is a play that is ultimately about stigmatization, and specifically the way that we assign arbitrary social punishment and ramifications towards things that we stigmatize for uncritically for reasons other than personal revulsion. That's why I think the queer discourse that's kind of lurking under the surface is also pretty interesting, because Phoebe's parents have no good reason to feel the way they do, other than it sort of repulses them in this sort of visceral way. And I wonder if we actually did have an actor picking her nose on stage, the audience might squirm and think that's weird, but I also feel like that would prove the point of the play and could almost be an interesting affirmation of what it's trying to say, because it does kind of hardline come down on don't judge people for doing things like picking their nose, even if you think it's gross. I don't know.
Jill's got comments.
I have something to say with my pointer
Please
finger.
Do.
I like that it is the gesture of the pointer, because I also think there's something, again, you said this piece is texture. There's something bigger going on in this piece of Patty finding out more about herself and her next chapter and dealing with her parents' divorce and coping with, grade 10, you're kind of advancing to the senior years of high school, like things are changing. Puberty is an actual embedded foundational thing now. And I do kind of like that the most aggressive, because a lot of the times she's like in a relationship with her finger too. She tries to like push it away from her nose. It's like zooming in on her nose.
Like Doc
but
Ock's claws,
the most aggressive is her doing this like, and I kind of like the motion of her just like popping her finger up, because it's almost, again, it's reminding us that she's kind of finding her voice. And that gesture to me is like, oh, I have something to say, or like, let me get this out, or like, I'm number one. Like, I like that this is in place, because not only is it like on the surface level, picking her nose, but the idea of like popping your finger up, it's like, do you have something to say? You're number one. Like, there's a lot more layers to that gesture and I do think with the actual picking of the nose, I think it would add a little bit of unfortunate, like distasteful distance between the audience and Patty. And like I said, I was enthralled that there was zero distance between us and her. Like, we were in her overall pocket.
I'm not even disagreeing with anything you're saying. And like, I think, these are all fine interpretations. It's not like a good choice, better choice. It's two good choices that would add very different things to the show, create a very different dynamic that part of me would love to go to the alternate dimension where that other version exists and see how the audience would react to that. And could the show convince the audience to, just because you're grossed out doesn't mean that there is a moral condemnation that needs to be had on these grounds, because that is ultimately what the show sort of seems like it's trying to be about. But as much as this show is a departure from realism, there's no expectation that she do it for real, but I wonder what some of that reality and the ickiness of that reality would add as an additional layer to this piece. That's all I'm saying.
If the piece has more of a future, we might see different interpretations. But on that note, we're going to close out Patty Picker and we'll move on to show number 2. Mac, take it away.
Yeah. So, I mean, all in all, the big takeaway from the first show is Ryan advocates for nose picking, just like George Costanza.
Yes, because the show
40 years in the desert, you're going to pick your nose, just like Moses.
Yeah. Like, I'm not saying I would like it, but I'm saying that I do think this show seems like it would like it, and I would like to see a version of this show that engages with that.
Okay, moving on to show number 2. Also, I do want to say, if we are mispronouncing any folks' names as we go on, apologies on our end. Back to you, Matt.
All right, show number 2, Girls Night Cabin Fever by Ghouls and Girls Theater. This one Jill and I saw, and it was written by Cassie Davidson and was directed by Michael Williamson. Jill, give us the breakdown about this very fun piece.
Yes. So, okay. Girls Night Cabin Fever, first of all, right out the gate, starred great friend of mine, Mackenzie Kelly, who is also a friend of Mac's, kind of all of ours. I've done some shows with Mac.
She's been on the Cup before.
Yes, she has. And so, yes, definitely wanted to slot this piece in, and super glad we did. So yeah, so just kind of like a blanket statement of what this show was all about. So it was 3 friends that decide to do like a girls' weekend in this cabin. And sort of as the play starts, we get to learn about, there's the program Mac is showing. We get to learn about each of the friends, and each of them are a classic girlfriend group stereotype. You've got the one who's very like type A, dots her I's, crosses her T's. She's the organizer. You've got the other friend who's a bit more outdoors. She's a nurse. And then you've got Mackenzie Kelly plays the friend who is like a zany, sort of bohemian like vibes.
Social influencer,
correct. So so they decide to come to this cabin for a girls' weekend, and things start to go awry. The power goes out. It's
a horrible old cabin that's filled with rats.
Exactly. You have a neighbor who comes in, and basically like the whole show is them discussing their past, discussing their current present, but all amidst sort of like these like horror genre things that are happening. So as the audience, you're sitting on your seat, totally captivated by these characters, but then the environment around them is showcasing a very eerie what's going to happen next. And I hope this show has a life beyond the Fringe. So
it absolutely should.
At the end, we get they have to get this neighbor to a hospital because he has bumped his head.
They've clubbed him with a rolling
They've clubbed
pin.
him. That's true. Yeah, I should get a bit more specific with that. But there's a huge storm happening outside. The power is out, so
they're drunk.
They're all drunk, so they can't drive him. So Mackenzie's character, Ember, right? Ember?
Yeah.
Amber?
Yeah, Ember. Yeah, Ember, yeah.
She posts like a social media post, can anyone come help us? And someone instantly responds and they show up, and it's a stalker of Ember's.
Well, I mean, we find that out at the end. At first,
we do find out
very helpful, but it's a good plan.
Mac, I knew instantly. That was way too fast, and that knock on the door was way too fast. I was like, this is not a great person.
Well, hold on, I chalked that up.
Female instincts for sure.
Yeah, but hold on. The fast knock, I chalked it up to just drama time, where it's like speeding up the clock because you couldn't wait like 20 minutes for somebody to actually show up. So that's where I was.
I was like, this person's been waiting outside of this cabin. This person's been keeping tabs on Ember. Yeah. Anyways, and then it sort of just kind of abruptly ends with everyone else cycles out to the truck, and the only person left on stage is this social media stalker, which I can't remember her name at the moment. Katie?
I don't know her character's name, but the actor's name who played it is Allison.
Yes. Oh, Marsha. Reprising her role as Marsha. Yes. Okay. So we're left with Marsha, and she is like, it's like
she picks up a butcher's knife.
Yeah, she picks up a knife, and she's like, "I'm going to go meet them."
Spoilers, I assume, right? I didn't.
And then it ends. Yeah, this is spoilers for sure. And then it ends, and so both Mac and I were. This is when we actually saw together, and we were like, "What's Act 2? This show needs an Act 2." I'm like, "What happens?"
Yeah.
So anyways, I guess that's kind of where the story, the journey we kind of go on, the camp, the horror camp story of it all, I guess. But I definitely want to, like, this, Mac and I both were like, this was a perfect Fringe script, like a perfect script too, but just like it sat so well in Fringe. We also saw a late night performance of this, and I happened to be at a birthday party with a bunch of girls, and I ended up like running to the theater like last minute, so I was very much like inside the vibe of what this piece ended up being, and it was just like a super awesome treat to watch mid-July, get to know, like I said, all of these different characters, which were impeccably performed. The stereotypes were punched absolutely through. Yeah, Mac, do you want to add some more? I can keep going.
I got so much more to add to this, Jill. I got so much more. So many thoughts. This is easily one of my favorite shows of the Fringe.
One thing I do want to say before I pop it to you is I did, to highlight the horror and eerie elements, I loved what they did with the lighting of this piece. Like we had when the power went out, the whole theater went dark, and we had like a good like 5 minutes in pure darkness of the characters talking, trying to figure stuff out. And then like what they had, like their cell phone lights, they find like these lights, these little lantern lights that they set up around the space. Like it quite literally, and it was in the Tarragona Extra space, so it looked like this broken down cabin that was just, because again, the set was dressed with like a couch and like a little nightstand and like a back sort of like a drink cart. So it was very sparse. So it really, it had us, again, we were inside the cabin. Yeah. So shout out to the lighting on my end. Mac, I'm going to volley it to you.
Well, you've taken most of my notes, so not much left. But no, this is one of my favorite shows of the Fringe. I wanted a second act. I think indie film producers should absolutely snap up this script and do more with it. The blocking physical comedy was great. There were some really solid moments there. The cast had genuine chemistry and were able to keep the pace up really well. There were a few plot points that I felt weren't needed. Like there was a whole plot point about the nerdy, the type A friend played by Cass Davidson, who played Liz, who talks about, to Mackenzie's character saying, I always thought you were the ugly friend in the friend group growing up. And I was like, but then that never gets paid off properly. So,
true.
I'm trying to go throwaway one where it's like, hey, like we'll sacrifice you first for that comment, but it's like, they even say we're going to put a pin in this conversation to like air out this grievance later, because
maybe they're saving it for Act 2.
Right. Once again,
Yeah.
like, that's why, like, I was really feeling that you needed a second act. I mean, you don't end on a big cliffhanger of somebody like picking up a butcher's knife to go basically axe off a bunch of people. And I mean, at first I was like, the reason why I thought, oh, maybe they are coming to save this person coming to save them is real, is because, you know, drama time, you just speed up the clock. You can't naturally wait 10 minutes for somebody to show up on stage. So it's like, and we're already dealing in a very comedic realm. So it's like already a broad, kind of like Stiff and Sons, Ryan, where it's like these characters are already big. Like realism's kind of out the door at this point. Yeah. Really. I mean, the fact they have the jam name, which I forget, is like something like Bushberry Goo or something like that.
Yeah, I forget, but it's the neighbor guy who shows up.
Reference, yeah.
He makes his own jam, and there's a whole thing. I kind of agree with you, Mac. I do find, so this piece dealt with a lot of like two-hander scenes, and I did find some of the scenes, the script itself was in some cases like unnecessarily beefy. Like I felt like there was some lines of dialogue that you could just get rid of and the point is still there. Like I still enjoyed the extra banter, but for the sake of like, if this does want to go on and add an Act 2, I find in this iteration of Act 1, you could shave off some of the conversation moments so that you could add maybe other things to catapult us into Act 2.
Yeah, I mean, like I will say this is a very tight script because at first I was like, that's weird that they just bring the stalker out of nowhere at the very end. But I'm like, but Mackenzie Kelly's character does set up, because they were going to post earlier in the story. She says, don't post and tag your location when you're at the location, because a stalker may come and find you. So that's a great like hidden like Easter egg or setup. That's kind of like in Die Hard when basically in the first scene Bruce Willis is told to take off his shoes, and you don't quite know how that's going to be a payoff until later on, when basically there's the looking glass later on with him having to run around in his bare feet. And it's like, but like that first thing about take your shoes off and scrunch your feet on the carpet is a great setup that you don't quite know where. And that's the same thing there, where it's like you think that's the end of that plot point, which is, you know, don't post live. That's all you need. So I will say, like, it's just a really tight script overall. I mean, I do think one of the things maybe if they wanted to hit more about a stalker is make it a little bit more clear that wasn't a raccoon they were fighting in the back room, that maybe that was somebody else trying to get in, that, you know, could have left a scratch.
Ryan's like, raccoon in the back room.
Right? Because that's such a random thing to like, why are they fighting a raccoon off stage? I get it. You need to get them off stage and like have them away from the space for a minute. But I was like, you could make it clear that if you're going to, like, there could be something else besides a raccoon is there. We don't quite know what it is.
Almost like as an idea, like maybe it's Marsha, like setting up like a camera or something.
Yeah.
And then they hear that noise and then it's gone, but then there's things that show up. Yeah.
And I will say, I want to give a special shout out to Kenny Rayner as our lone male of the cast, who was terrific, very funny. And he was screaming a lot. Like his voice, I was like, dude, the fact you've already been doing this show and haven't lost your voice yet is terrific. And Lindsay, or I think it's Lindsay, or no, Iris?
Lizzie? Iris, yeah.
Oh no, maybe not Iris. No, maybe it was Lindsay Moffat as Charlie, the kind of the outdoorsy friend, the nurse friend. They had great chemistry together. I was so invested in them, and then being a couple by the end of them, like it was such a great, wonderful.
Do you know what's so funny about that too, Mac? Like both of our other characters were like instantly matching them together. Like you could tell they're like, Charlie's single, here's our single friend. And then it's like, it's the classic thing of like when, like they just instantly girl grouped her into, and just, there was like a moment of like awkwardness between the two characters of like, but then you were like, oh wait, they kind of, I think they have a crush on each other. They do kind of work together. They do kind of work together. And I mean, I love the coma check scene where she's doing the eye thing and he's just doing really big eyes and she's like, well, definitely concussed. It was just so well done. The show was terrific. I loved it. Very, very well done. And again, like we're going to probably, I was going to say, we're probably going to sound like a broken record, but definitely this show needs life again. Absolutely. And
in a second act.
Mac and I want to see that second act.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, what could it be?
Bring this cast back, bring this show back with the same team and give us a
because I also think you could do a whole
Fringe series every year of girls' night go to Vegas, girls' night,
girls' night,
go skiing or something like that. Where every time it's a different location, and you keep bringing them back.
Mac, I don't know if you felt this as well, but I felt like the genre of horror and like it built. Like it had like a nice trajectory. So like woof, if you're going into act 2 and to just keep going, like I feel like it could turn into like a Saw moment if we really wanted it to.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I also just want to say just a shout out to Cassie Davidson as well for doing the whole pee joke throughout the whole thing and just keeping that joke running about the pee. That was so funny and well done. Like that's such a great honest drunk thing joke of, just keep drinking more and you won't mind where you have to go pee.
And them getting absolutely wasted on the margarita that Mackenzie playing Ember makes for it's great. There's little tidbits, Ryan, that we aren't sharing because if it gets a life, you've got to see it.
I'm sorry I missed this one.
You missed out, Ryan. You missed out.
Great. So that is Girls' Night Cabin.
Speaking of raccoons, I think that'll get us into the next show pretty well.
Yes. It's almost like Ryan themed it that way.
I had no idea there was a raccoon in Girls' Night Cabin. This is a pure coincidence. I didn't see it. How would I have known that?
We love it.
You never know, Ryan. You got your finger on the pulse things. That's good campaign managers do. All right. Next one is 86 and Me, the restaurant play by Dead Raccoon. And it was seen by Jill and Ryan. So Ryan, summarize this piece for us.
Okay. Yeah. 86 Me. So this is Dead Raccoon Theater, #trash theater. It's written and directed by Jackson Donner. Apologies about all pronunciations always. So this, it's an interesting one. Anyone who watched our Fringe roundups from last year or who attended Fringe last year might think that a lot of this sounds familiar because Dead Raccoon did another site-specific show in the same bar, Supermarket in Kensington Market, that was called Retrograde. The Concert Experience was their play from last year. And I was very enthusiastic about that, gave it a very positive review, thought it was a really neat, interesting piece. I went in with like zero expectations and was kind of blown away. This one is also interesting, but I think my expectations were a lot higher because of how much I enjoyed their show last year. And I did feel a little disappointed by this one by comparison. So I guess the general premise is that we follow... It's a 7-person cast, and it's a group of young people documenting their millennial and Gen Z ennui as all these jaded young people hate working at a bar. That's kind of the initial premise. We're introduced to Zach, the new guy, played by Luke Kimball of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child fame, who his dad owns the bar, and he's kind of been given this job to... It's sort of unclear what his job is. He's sort of like... He's not quite the manager, but he also walks around with a clipboard and he's like doing inspections, but he's also kind of just like working at the bar. Little unclear, but he's, basically thrown in. And the whole play takes place over the course of one very eventful day in the setting with all these wacky characters, each of whom have their own problems and relationship issues with each other and with others. And I'm kind of reluctant to even get more into the plot than that. All of the characters are interesting. One of the most inventive things I think about this whole show is what I've been calling the bartending shtick, is that prior to the show, patrons are seated at the various tables in this bar to watch it, and they are invited to purchase drink tickets. So that if you've purchased a ticket at any point during the show, you can raise your ticket and place an order for a beverage to the characters in the play as they're working at the bar. And there was a lot of at least when I saw it, a lot of very funny moments that are completely unplanned and unscripted of people choosing very appropriate and or inappropriate moments to place these drink orders and interrupting the action. And the cast did such a good job of responding to it, keeping character, responding to the ways that this interrupts a lot of the tension of what's going on in the scenes. So I thought that was really interesting. It kind of made me question, though, the element of fourth wall breakingness of this, because I feel like the characters' relationship to the audience, it was unclear to what extent they could see us. Would they be having these very intimate conversations in the middle of the crowded bar the way they are? It almost seemed like more often than not, the bar was supposed to be completely empty, at least during the first act. But then the audience is able to raise their hand and have a conversation with the actors. So it's sort of, the fourth wall is kind of more like a membrane in this way, that sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. I thought that was interesting, but almost raised more questions than answers. Jill, anything you want to chime in, please?
Yeah, I'll take the torch from you. And so another opportunity for audience members was they had a cup with like fake change in it. And if you liked something that was said by a character, or you related to it, or you thought it was funny, you could tip the character. So like you would hear a coin drop into a cup. And I loved that because, again, being like a performer myself, like I just think that's kind of like an auditory clap or congratulations, or like a relatability that's kind of like, again, evoking this relationship between the performer and the audience. Like when there was a really heavy moment of like, a character maybe, like wearing their heart on their sleeve, you heard random audience members around the space drop their coin in. Or if there's a super funny joke happen, you heard random people drop their coin in. So there was like this like community understanding or relatability that I just feel like in a piece that's not an immersive piece, you can't really suss that out in real time from your audience. But with this mechanism, as like performer and as characters, you can hear your work being digested and related to, which I thought that was like a really cool thing. And it kind of fell under the same theme of like these characters, not only are they just kind of like under this roof of a bar, like Ryan kind of mapped out, but they're each kind of a pillar of trauma or like demons that like every human has probably currently or at some point in their life. So I just thought it was like, again, a really good way of tethering the space all together. But I didn't get a chance to see their performance last year, this company's show last year. But I kind of would agree with you, Ryan. Like I found the pace of this piece was a bit wonky and kind of slow, but I don't really know what, again, I kind of liked that it was just a day in the life of a bar, and there really is an unpredictability to that. So it's not that I really wanted the story to kind of be tied up with more of a bow. I think just personally, it just seemed like a normal day. And maybe that's me coming in like expecting like a classic point A to point B to point C theater piece. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, if I could comment on that. Like, yeah, to me, it's interesting because it both, I think, is and is not a normal day in the life of these characters. It's interesting. Pace is a good way of sort of like kind of locking in on where maybe some of the problems lie. This is, I think, the only Fringe show I saw that had an intermission, and because they're in their own venue, they kind of have the freedom to do that. And I feel like part of the reasoning for it was just to give people more opportunity to buy drinks and support the bar that's housing them. But the fun is to buy your drink in the middle of the show. So I don't know if that pause was really necessary. It kind of ground a lot of things to a halt right in the middle of it. And yeah, like, this is a day in the life, but it's supposed to be a very eventful day. Our protagonist, Zach, is, I forget how long they said, but he's like several years sober, and working at a bar is a kind of interesting choice in that context, but they try to kind of justify that narratively. But near the end of the play, he has like a serious moment where he contemplates taking a drink. He flips his AA chip to sort of decide. And a lot of things happen, and he does, at least in that moment, feel like he may have killed someone. I still never really got the sense that this was such an extraordinarily bad day that he would be on the brink of deciding to break his years of sobriety. It's weird. Like it on paper, it sounds like it should be, but the vibes never quite settled there. And I think some of the janky pacing kind of got us there. And in terms of like the, tying things up in a bow narratively, I think part of what I think is one of the weaker elements of the script is just how it ends with basically each character getting a turn to say some big triumphant monologue that kind of caps off their version of the story they're living. And it really kind of just like, okay, now it's your turn, and now it's your turn, and I guess now it's your turn. And it felt like too much of an ending for this show that really just was doing a good job of being a slice of life. And I don't know, maybe it doesn't need to be bookended that way as much.
Yeah, I agree. I do want to shout out a couple performers of the piece. So Marianne McIsaac, who played Jasmine, the regular. So you got to, as Ryan mapped out, the audience gets to sit in the bar at a location in the bar for this piece. And you have the option of either sitting kind of like in a thrust sort of aisle way, or you can sit in a booth, or you have the option of sitting on the stage, which had a table, chairs, and stools. I obviously took the option of sitting on the stage.
Of course, I got as
Ben
far away
does.
from the stage as possible.
Yeah. Ben, who was a performer in the piece, a good friend of Ryan and I's, he advised me that was the most intense space to sit. So I was like,
He advised me that too, and I'm like, great,
and
I
you
will
took
stay
the
away from
opposite.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you. For the
Not
heads up.
surprised. So I sat on the bar stool, and what was really neat is Marianne McIsaac, who plays Jasmine the regular, her table is also on the stage space. So like you kind of got right up and personal with her specificity of Jasmine, like breathtaking. Like this regular is kind of dressed as like an older lady who, comes every single day. And they mentioned right off the hop, like she comes in at 5 p.m. She's got on like multi layers of clothes. She's got her 3 red solo cups, her crossword word book, and she's asking for like bottomless martinis
And French fries.
And French fries, exactly. And if she doesn't get her exact order, like you're gonna hear about it. And yeah, Marianne's performance was just, it kind of reminded me of I played on a virtual iteration of Angels in America. I played the like soup lady. I don't remember the exact character's name, but
Yes, lady and the angel. Correct?
Yes. And it kind of like just how deep and far Marianne went with Jasmine. Like it was like an out of body experience for her and for us. And she knew, it was kind of also, it gave off like a clown. Like she knew everyone in that bar better than they knew themselves.
Mm-hmm.
She was the sort of like, there was a lot of comic relief in this in certain moments, but like she really was that like outside eye, but inside knowledge kind of character for us. So yeah, really want to shout her out. And I also want to shout out Carson Salmonyal, again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, as Dustin, the supervisor. Again, very deep, dark sort of backstory for him, clearly struggling with substance abuse, but really just like comes in helming the space every time that he's in it, and ping-ponging kind of from the bar to the stage to the back room. Yeah, just really, I really found like Jasmine and Dustin were kind of like our tethered, like our pillar points, and everyone else just kind of revolved, in my opinion, around them. But
that's
phenomenal performances across the board. But those
are no, and I would agree. Both of them were very stunning, and I think it's interesting you say that because I would argue that those characters almost feel more peripheral to the main action in a lot of way. Like I think, Luke Kimball as Zach is clearly like our de facto protagonist, and it's more, even though everybody gets interesting, well-defined arcs, it's very much his story and his kind of crush relationship with Eva, the hostess, played by Mia Hay, is very much central in a lot of it. And I think so many of the various plot points sort of spin off of them. But yeah, like I think these characters who almost feel more peripheral get to have, I don't want to say richer arcs, but they intrigue us more because we are more often withheld from what's going on with them, which I think is really interesting. You mentioned Ben earlier. I feel bad shouting him out because he's my boy, and I don't want that bias to permeate these thoughts. But I thought he was excellent. His character,
always,
fake French accent was so perfect, and he sung the most beautiful rendition of the bilingual national anthem that any of us who went to French immersion schools are very familiar with. Very well done. Kind of icky, pathetic character he played, but that just makes his performance all the more impressive.
I also just say, because Ben was friends with Ryan before myself, but the more I get to know Ben too, like the more it's just really occurring to me, like he has such an authenticity to every role that he plays. And I love watching my actor friends be like, oh my God, that's just you. And then you're playing this character. It's like, I just find, there's such an empathy that oozes out of Ben in all of the roles that he does. And then just, getting to know him outside of theater as well. I'm like, that's just the guy that he is. So we love you, Ben.
All right. One last thought, because we're probably going long on this one, but I found it kind of frustrating, and maybe that's the point, that they had a Chekhov's pinata that is integrated into the plot. There's like a pinata with the dead raccoon logo on it, not the logo of the bar, the fictional bar that we're in, but with the theater company's logo. And the pinata gets integrated into the plot, but I swear to God, I was waiting for the moment when somebody would knock it down and something would come out of it, and that things came out of it. But I felt like that was a deliberate frustration to have a pinata, then not have it broken open at some point. But this is a weird scrappy company that I admire the hell out of that will just do things like have a piñata hanging above their play, and maybe that'll be important, maybe not. It's hashtag trash theater.
Yeah. And I will say, just to cap everything off too, props to being very relatable, like just from the relationship conversations, the sort of like pivotal life changes that the characters are going through. And then also personally, I've just started a serving job as one of my side jobs. And so kind of being immersed in a day in the life, I was like, I understand everything that they're going through. So yeah, thank you, Dead Raccoon, for blessing us with 86 Me, the restaurant play. On to the next, Mac.
Yeah, the next one's one of mine. It's Sheila the Musical by Have It Off Productions. And this was a one artist piece. It was created and solo performed by Jay Hill. And they are playing the titular Sheila, who is the quintessential bearded housewife. And basically, long story short, this is an exploration of gender roles in the 1950s. And so Sheila is the stereotypical housewife who is kind of living in her daily life of watching her TV, cleaning the house, keeping house, basically, making sure dinner's ready for her unseen husband when they get home. And then they meet their new neighbor, Jean, whose marriage and lifestyle contradicts her own, as they say. And that just unlocks Sheila, and she begins to chafe and kind of spin out within those four walls of that perfected middle class box that they are in. And so it's a very interesting exploration of gender roles, gender characters. I will say Jay is superb as a performer. They held my focus wonderfully. And at one point they're singing, then they're screaming. There is a situation where they end up waterboarding a baby. Luckily, at the end, you realize that the baby is not an actual baby, but like a doll. The character itself is a baby. It's meant to represent motherhood and domesticity. I know it gets a little confusing. That's something I will say is I wish they had clarified that a bit more.
Wait, back it up.
I just went on a whole roller coaster ride for a second.
Sorry, so just to clarify for the benefit of us who didn't see it, there is like a doll baby on stage.
A doll baby that's treated as a real baby.
But within the fiction, it is actually supposed to be a doll, or it is supposed to be a real baby.
That's the twist. Is that it is supposed to be a doll the entire time, but you don't know that until the end.
The semiotics of theater are getting in the way of the clarity.
Yeah. Which, once again, I didn't know this, and a lot of the audience didn't know this either. So at some points we were cringing at what was going on with the baby, and so I would say maybe clarify that a bit earlier, because that really kind of made me very, very uncomfortable.
I imagine that the uncomfortness is probably the point.
Oh, I agree. Something comforting is, but with certain things as like infants. There is something in the stomach that the minute you see, like, you throw a baby against a wall, it's like, what is going on here? Like, clearly this character is having a breakdown, and we do know, there are many situations women after having a baby, there is those unfortunate cases mental health wise where things like this can happen, and so it's like, where are we going on this roller coaster?
Yeah.
So I mean, if they wanted that to be a message of the piece too, where it's like, hey, we need to give women more resources, particularly after having children, because there is the fourth stage of pregnancy that we don't talk about enough, that absolutely should be talked about more, postpartum, so it's like, this is a real thing. So I mean, they could have had a message like that. I didn't know where this was going till the end, when Sheila decides to leave the house, not make her husband dinner, and go out with Jean. That's how the show ends, on a very bright, happy note. But the journey to get there sometimes is a bit of an up and down adventure. So I really enjoyed it. I thought it definitely was a captivating piece. I would say maybe they just clarified the baby a bit more. Yeah. But the music was fun. Everything was very I Love Lucy-esque, like very 1950s. And to go on Phil's note, this had a great poster. That's what caught me first, was the poster of Jay as their other persona as Sheila in the 1950s garb, smoking a cigarette. I was like, this looks captivating. Count me in. So
nice.
Bill's note.
And Mac,
if the poster's good, you're good to go.
Yeah. Remind us what venue this was in again.
This was hosted at the same place where you and I saw Desperate Measures, Jill.
Okay, so this was the Theater Pass Marai backspace.
You got it. Yeah. That one.
Okay. Great. Okay, so quite an intimate
Very intimate
space for all of these. Yeah, these
Well, once
large.
again, the set was very bare boned. Like, it wasn't a big set.
Mhm.
So, like, there's no actual TV on stage. It's just lights and visual and audio to like simulate the TV, things like that. So,
Great.
yeah, I mean, they kept it very nice as well. But yeah, the costume design, terrific. Like very, very classic 1950s fashion, which I just have to, at some point, should come back in style because those outfits were very spiffy in the 50s.
Listen, I have a ton of 50s-esque dresses in my very closet. So
there you go, Jill. Rock them.
We'll bring it back. We'll bring it back.
Bring it back, Jill. Bring it back. And yeah, so this was a very solid piece. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So well done.
Awesome. So that is Sheila the musical.
Yes. Back
On
over
to
to
the
you, Jill,
next.
for Disarming Venus by Act 3 Theater. This was a Jill only show.
Yes. Okay. So, fun fact, and like a kind of segue. So, Disarming Venus was actually rehearsed with Marianne McIsaac. So, why I say that is Disarming Venus is a devised piece. All of the women that were involved did devise it, but Marianne was sort of like overseeing the process. So, Marianne, who played Jasmine in 86 Me, oversaw the multiple vignettes of Venus, is what I will call this piece, because this piece was astonishing. I think, in my opinion, I've said with some pieces, a perfect thing for Fringe. This is the perfect Fringe piece. It stars a plethora of women aged 50 or above. And basically the premise is there's vignettes, so like multiple different scenes that all happen in a same location. And this location is a museum exhibit that is highlighting the statue Venus. So each vignette has either a duo or a trio of women talking about an element of womanhood. So whether that be the orgasm, whether that be aging, whether that be, the three of them admiring this younger boy that's walking by the museum, and that, like, are they going to notice me? There's representation of different cultures and different race and women. And there's one vignette where one of the actors actually comes out fully painted in white with her hands behind her back, positioned as Venus, and does a whole monologue as the statue Venus, and goes off on like patriarchy and everything like that. And so so I also really wanted to see this because Act 3, the group, stars a lot of my past castmates from the Women at Plays Festival that I did about 2 years ago almost now. So Dawn Obokata and Heather Sharon, they were a part of this cast. They were a part of a cast of mine in the past. So supporting them, but also being introduced into all of these other women that I know, they get together quite often, this Act 3 group of women, to workshop and do theater, which I just think is a demographic of women, especially in the Canadian theatrical realm, that doesn't have a lot of opportunity. So the fact that Act 3 exists and it's just this sort of sisterhood of women, and the fact that they were able to do this piece, which just elevated femininity all amidst and surrounding the statue of Venus, was just brilliantly done. And the fact that it was in vignettes, so we had 19 scenes or 19 vignettes, and each were about like a couple minutes. It kind of varied in length, each one, but it allowed there to be, it was like a variety show. Like, if you didn't personally relate to a piece, you were digesting it, you were learning, and then the next sort of set of museum goers would pass in or cross by. But another thing this piece did brilliantly was, even though the stories are being told from women that are in their later years of life, the genre of theater that were being played upon, again, we had like conversation pieces, but we also had monologue pieces. We also had poetry. We also had a lot of movement. Dawn, especially, a lot of her pieces had a lot of like clown movement tagged to it. So it was showcasing and doing dramaturgically, using the multiple genres of theater to showcase the wide palette of womanhood. And that just like constantly kept gnawing beautifully at my heartstrings. because when this happens to me all the time, but when the form of theater matches or directly contrasts the text, that's what's going on. Like that's when the waterworks happen, or that's when the relatability happens. One thing that was super cool was, as a transition point, there was this puppet that was stage left, and the puppet was like almost like a doctor, like an old lady doctor, funny thing that was like commenting on the piece before and then setting up the piece upcoming. So it was like this female puppet was like our transitionary, like host, if you will, or MC. So I just thought that was like, again, like another element of theater that was used, and like this funny old lady puppet. It was used a lot in their advertising too. So I definitely want to see this piece put on at a big theater house. Like I would love like Can Stage or Tarragon or any of our bigger houses to take this on, because like I said, I think it in one show, which this spanned, I believe it was an hour and a half. Can't remember the exact runtime at the moment, but it hit every box, and it beautifully ends with all of them lining the stage dressed in red, which is a poignant color of womanhood, and like sort of collectively banding together. Coming off of the last scene had a song element to it. So just seeing like all of those women play all of the different roles, because the cast was quite large, but every actor doubled or tripled or quadrupled as well. So there was, again, so many layers upon layers of womanhood that everybody sitting in the audience, I would say I was one of the younger folks in the audience. There was a lot of like older ladies and men as well, but again, it's just a piece of theater that's like not seen very often or not represented very often. And let's get that on a bigger stage. Let's get that on a bigger scope, because I mean, that the classic old saying of a lot of theater goers are older audience members too. And so let's give them a piece that they can kind of relate to as well. So thank you, Act 3 Theater, for Disarming Venus. Yeah. Do you guys have any questions?
I don't know how we're doing for time on this, but just the way
we're doing good.
The way you've described it, I think an obvious comparison comes to my mind. That's the vagina monologues.
That's what I was thinking that's too. I'm like, this could be a great companion piece.
Yeah, would you say that's a fair comparison, or is it doing something kind of uniquely its own, or yes-anding that piece?
I feel like I'm going to be like a terrible performer. I actually don't know a lot about the vagina.
Not just a terrible performer, a terrible woman.
Oh, female performer.
Joe, I'm shocked there's not a monologue.
I don't know. I'd have to read that play.
We also did our undergrad at a school, Mac and I, that did the vagina monologues every year. So
I didn't
have
a lot of
exposure to it.
I know that, but that's kind of really embarrassing that I don't know this. Maybe we'll cut this out.
You no, don't cut it out. You got to enjoy a version of it untainted by that comparison.
A Canadian depiction, and so there's also their little program here for those of you watching this episode on YouTube. Like, it has it all beautifully written out of all the vignettes, and then it's got the history of all the different Venuses that they chat about. Because it's not just Venus de Milo. We have Venus of Willendorf, who is, if you can see, there she is there. Yeah. And then we've Botticelli's Birth of Venus is chatted upon as well. And then we also have Saartjie-Baartman, Black Venus. There was a whole beautiful segment on that.
Yes, there was a play. There's a play about
her.
Very sad story.
Venus by Suzanne Laurie Parks. Yeah.
Yes.
But it's also just a very well-known story across just various Black diaspora history. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, the layers, the palette, and being a woman. Yeah, that's us. Like, there's a lot there, and they checked a lot of those boxes. So thank you, Act 3, for Disarming Venus.
Act 3.
There you go. All right. Next up, we have AbracadabraHaHa by Fish the Magish. Magish. Yep.
He's a magician, you see.
There you go. That makes sense.
Nice.
Yes. And this was seen by Jill, and some of it was seen by Ryan.
But kind of the opposite.
Other way around. Seen by Ryan, and then Jill will wants to magically talk about some stuff after Ryan takes the reins.
Fair.
Yeah. Okay, so this, yeah, AbracadabraHaHa by Fish the Magish. Fish the Magish is the alias of magician and comedian Rob Fishbaum. And before I can get into talking about this show, I have backstory that I need to. I feel like it would be impossible for me to review this show without getting into this, because it also kind of dictates why I wanted to see this in the first place. When I realized that Fish the Magish had a show in Fringe this year, I was quite surprised, because that name means something very specific to me. This man performed at my brother's bar mitzvah. In 2005, my folks hired a magician to perform at my brother's bar mitzvah. I was 11, my brother was 13, obviously. And yeah, so Rob Fishbaum, aka Fish the Magish, has long, almost 20 years backstory in my life here. So, and then, okay, before I get into the end, then, so as a kid, I thought this guy was like the coolest, most amazing magician I've ever seen. He did this one really cool trick at the bar mitzvah where my folks had some like prizes they wanted to give away over the course of the evening, and asked him to kind of integrate that into his show. So the grand finale was, at the time, 2005, the coolest thing you could get would be a boombox. So they wanted him to give away this boombox as part of the show. So he made a bingo game for everyone to participate. And my folks told me and my brothers that, listen, you can play the bingo game, but as like the family hosting this, if you win, you can say bingo, it's fun, but then let's the next person get the prize. So I'm sitting there with my bingo card, and he's calling out numbers, and I'm like, I think I'm actually getting close to winning. Well, I know the instruction, but it'll be fun to shout bingo. If I win, I probably won't win, but maybe. Yeah. He calls out B37. It's my last number. I stand up and shout bingo at the same time that literally everybody else in the room does, because he rigged the game that everybody would shout bingo at the exact same time.
Yeah.
What? That's so cool. How did you do it?
I don't know. But as an 11-year-old, that was the most impressive magic trick I'd ever seen in my life to that point.
I'm impressed.
Yeah. Oh, so, you wait.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's chapter 1 of the backstory. Then Jill and I were at the lottery party for Fringe, however many months ago that was. And we're sitting in the audience, and when they call the numbers in a bingo-esque fashion for who gets picked for Fringe, I hear Fish the Magish. I know Fish the Magish. And little did I realize the man who was sitting next to me at the lottery party stands up, and I was sitting next to Fish the Magish this whole time.
Honestly,
I didn't
Ryan was like,
like 20 years.
It was like it was a celebrity. It was like it was a celebrity.
Oh, and I wish I'd seen this.
Yeah, he ran up to the stage at the lottery party, like did a magic trick on stage while accepting his entrance into the Toronto Fringe. I'm like, this is amazing. I need to see Fish the Magish at Toronto Fringe 2024.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So tell us about it.
Yeah, also my parents wanted to see the show too, so they also went to see this show and Blast from the Past. Yeah, so that's backstory. The show is fun. It's a funny comedy magic show, as the title suggests. AbracadabraHaHa. It's fusing some comedy, some magic. He even had a line in the show about how people say, yeah, comedy, magic, but put the two together and maybe you've got something. And he does indeed got something here. This guy is so funny. He's so charismatic. It's kind of exactly what you come for. He tells jokes and does magic tricks, kind of weaving the two together, but somewhat back and forth. He has, I think part of what's most impressive about his magic is he does something kind of reminiscent of Penn and Teller, where he starts by presenting the audience like he's going to teach you how a trick is done to sort of demystify the process of magic. And he does that, and he sort of walks us through the steps of a trick. So we're like, okay, we understand. But then he does something else, like adds a new layer of an additional trick that undermines the explanation we just got of how the trick is done. Like he did this trick with like a fake egg, and he showed us how the fake egg works, but then he cracks it and it's a real egg. Like, well, okay, I thought I understood that you were teaching me how to do this, but then a new wrinkle is presented. So he has like quite a few things throughout the show that are like that, which is really cool. The most impressive one, and I have no idea how he does this, is short of just memorizing a whole book, I guess. But he did this really funny trick where he brought someone from the audience and gave them a Sherlock Holmes, Adventures of Sherlock Holmes book. And he stood back to back with them and said, okay, pick a random page and read like the first sentence. Just pick a random page, tell me what page it is, and I will recite to you what that text is, like the first sentence on that page. So they're standing back to back, and we, the audience, see that he pulls out an identical book. And as he's getting the page numbers, he's flipping through and reading it. So the person, it's a trick being played on the audience participant because they think this is amazing. He knows all the words, but we see that he's cheating. Ha, it's funny for us. But then as they turn to each other and he reveals that he has the book, haha, big laugh, he shows us that the pages of the book are completely blank. He wasn't reading along. And I'm like, oh my God, what? Like, that was the vibe of this show. Like, every time you think you thought the source of the comedy was, let me show you how I did this trick. And then he throws in the new layer of, aha, there's an even greater trick that you had no idea. Like, he's actually really incredible. And like, not all of the tricks are necessarily mind-blowing, but they're all very entertaining, and he has a funny demeanor. I will say that there are a few tricks that have clearly been in his repertoire for a while, because there were some things he did in this show that I didn't realize I remembered from my brother's bar mitzvah show until he said a line or did a thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, I've seen this before. He did it back then. So, he's using tried and true material. There's a funny joke where he tells a story about his dad, and there's a funny line about him calling his dad, listen, Buster, but that's actually my dad's name, so I wasn't being rude. And I remember I had like the kind of flashback of, I've heard this joke before, wait a minute. And anyway, it's hard for me to be critical, objective with any of this, because there's so much like personal history and weird things tied up in this. But I thought, this was such a real fun time. He did have, for the most part, this was like an all ages type show. He had one late evening show that was supposedly adult oriented, R-rated. I did not go to that one. I went to one of the main daytime shows that was appropriate for all ages. I did talk to some friends and other critics that I know who did attend the adult oriented show, and most of them said that despite that label, it was still fairly tame. Maybe he threw in like one F-bomb, one slightly raunchier joke, but otherwise you could probably, take a mature child to any of them. But I thought this was a hoot. It was a really good time. Jill, I know you have more you want to say about this, even though you didn't see it, so by all means.
So what was so neat is, because I went to the Fringe Lottery with Ryan, I got to see like who Fish the Magician was. But I frequented the Fringe tent every night almost. Made really good friends with the bartender, Brianna, shout out, and to everyone else there. So what I really loved about Fish the Magician was at the earlier tent soirees of Fringe, as part of his advertising for his show, is he was doing street magic. So, which means he was walking around and he had like a deck of cards or like coins or stuff that, you would see done on the street. And that's how he would just pop up and do magic tricks for folks. And then at the end, plug that he's doing AbracadabraHaHa and as a part of Fringe. So shout out to phenomenal marketing, because you're giving us a taste of what we could see. And he's like, this is street magic. And then this show that you're going to be seeing is stage magic. And he's like, they're different in certain ways. So it was a night that I was actually catching up with Katie Miller, who's also a great friend of and's been on the Cup. And her and I are just sitting at a table, and Fish comes up to us and just asks if he can do some card tricks with us. And Katie and I, our minds were blown. I was like, and I've been to Vegas, and I was like, at the end of this, I was like, Fish, you could be in Vegas. Like, the fact that he would just make cards turn into different cards without anything, like without going through a sleeve or like going into his pocket. And by the end of it, I was just like, of course that's going to be my card, because like this man is an actual wizard. And he was just like, had such a sweet demeanor. He was like, like, I'm a high school counselor right now, but when I retired, like, I'd love to do this more full time. And I was like, please do, because you have such a wonderful aura about you. And like it's the best magic, like the best magician I've ever come face to face with. Because I also think, like you were saying, Ryan, like the way he delivers too is such like a chortly kind of like fun, quippy way. You kind of got to keep up with him, like stay on your feet. And then you think the trick is what the trick is going to be. And then at the last minute, he changes it. And you're just like, that to me is part of his shtick, I think. And it's just.
Yeah. I think
so
also
great.
it's cool that you're mentioning the sort of like up close magic vibe that you had at the tent, because on multiple occasions when I was standing in line for another show during Fringe, he would show up and just like start doing tricks for people in the lines of a completely different show. And it's all part of this kind of marketing strategy that he knows, like, this is how you get people excited for a magic show. Show them a trick out of context, bombard them in a different setting, and then if you can wow them and charm them, then maybe they'll come to the actual thing. So very well done.
So everyone, like, hire Fish the Magician for your parties, for your soirees.
Your children's bar mitzvahs.
Amazing. So that's AbracadabraHaHa. by Fish the Magician. Moving on to our next show.
Wonderful. Next one is Colonial Circus, another Jill and Ryan show, and this one was Cultura Opus Inc. and 2 Mango.
Yeah, Ryan, do you want to give us a little
summarize
outline?
Boy.
Yeah, this is a tough one to summarize. I'll do my best. So this is a clown show. It is one of many. I think I alluded to this in part 2 when I was talking about Rat Academy, but this was a very good fringe for clown duos, semi-verbal clown duos. We'll talk more about another one in particular later on. But yeah, so our 2 performers are named Shreya Parashar and Sachin Sharma. Again, apologies with all pronunciations. It was directed by Isaac Kessler, who Toronto audiences might know from One Man No Show fame. And yeah, this is like a deliberately disorienting clown piece that is framed as being a brief history of colonialism. We are introduced to these 2 South Asian performers donning whiteface, both as white-faced clowns, but also as representations of colonial hegemony. And they do these little skits that lampoon the colonial mindset with varying degrees of literalness and abstractness between each of the sketches. This is a show that, I don't know, Jill, I kind of want to lob it to you more because I was really expecting to love this one and I really wanted to love it, but I found a lot of things about it really just didn't quite hit the mark for me. I know you enjoyed it and came out a lot more enthusiastic than I did. So I kind of want to let you get more into your experience and then I can maybe jump off of some of that.
Yeah. No, thank you for setting me up. I think that was sort of like a wonderful blueprint to kind of get us started. But yeah, like Ryan said, they kind of did various skits that punched and stabbed and again, used absurdist clowning to punch and stab the colonial agenda or the history of colonization, and in a very like clever, whimsical way, in my opinion. Again, this show had audience interaction, verbal and also like audience participation, where they would sometimes come out, at least in my show. So that's also something I want to ask you, Ryan, is like some of the elements of this piece was quite improvised based on the audience, specific like demographic of the audience. So we also might have different experiences in those different moments of the piece. But essentially, we're weaved between these super highly absurdist, energized snapshots of 2 like POC actors displaying colonization. And personally, I really, really enjoyed it. Again, I had an energized audience who was in on it the whole time. And I just found like the fact that it was snapshots and there wasn't a clear structure. I think, again, dramaturgically, how this piece was set up really, again, went against the sort of, Freytag's pyramid colonized white way of theater, for lack of a better word. And it showed in just like one word, sort of like just saying savage or just making a sound or just using a piece of fabric. So using like chunks of theater that don't necessarily have, the westernized way of, what is this doing to this piece or what is this plot point? Yeah, it just kind of had us embrace and take in. And I thought, that was just like really clever in my opinion. And it was the improvisation skills to literally take, because it wouldn't just be like I said, audience participation. They would take an audience response and then like physicalize or like respond. Then I'm like, there's no way they planned that. So the chemistry between our 2 actors had to be perfection because, for example, like they would ask questions to the audience. And I don't remember the actual meat of this question, but it really, really, really irked one of our performers. And they did not back down and they stayed so heavily on that point. And then the other performer had to like come in and literally physically hold back her like clown reaction.
Right. That's something like that happened in mine too. I forget exactly also what the context,
but again, then they just spun because there's no way there's audience plants or anything because they literally asked the audience and someone shouted something out. I shouted something out too. So it's like So maybe they had planned reactions, like taking anything they heard and twisting it to make the gestures or to make the reaction what it was. But again, either way, I think it was just, astonishing. And the stage pictures, so they had this giant red cloth that they used in so many ways. It sort of became the gown of this like governess, or it became like the long boat that's taking them to the new world, or it like spanned the time of, to me, it kind of gave like timeline essence, like spanned the time of colonization and how distorted and how, folding it up one way, but unfolding it the other, or refolding it or retelling it a different way. Like, I just thought the use of the red fabric was brilliant. And also I think this fact of this flowing red fabric, it again kind of got us into the deeper of like how much like blood and agency has been spilled or lost due to colonization. Like, I just thought the color red was very poignant in that way. Brian, do you want to kind of
like, I hear everything you're saying, and like, I think there was a lot of great stuff in this, and just like the improv and clowning skills of these two performers is incredible. I guess I think a lot of my gripes come down to the actual ways that it engages with history, be it satirical or deconstructionist, and I kind of kept feeling like more often than not it was observing and mocking, but a lot of, I think I read something in like the ad copy for this show, or maybe on social media or in a program somewhere, about how it's trying to pick at the scabs of colonization and try healing those wounds. And I kind of never quite felt like it was bridging that gap. It was kind of, a lot of it just to me felt like they were bringing up absurd things about colonialism that most, I would say, Toronto Fringe theater going audiences are already familiar with, have heard versions of these jokes before, maybe not told this way. But I kind of just think there was a lot of observing and pointing and laughing, which can be a good necessary first step towards healing, but never quite arrived at something that I would call like cathartic. Yeah.
I disagree. I disagree with that. Just
but
because
you're allowed. I'm speaking for myself. Please.
Yeah. No, I just feel like, because even in a cathartic lens, like I feel like the way that they displayed and reacted, like in these like intense gestural and like absurdist theatrical ways, I think is a version of doing that. I wouldn't be surprised if part of their advertising of this piece was to entice audiences to then showcase it in a different way than they're used to. Like similar to like Cliff Cardinal's As You Like It. Like get folks in the seats to be like, this sounds captivating. How are they going to do this? How are they going to break this down? And then when you get there, it's something that you're unexpected to sort of digest and take in. Yeah, because I thought it was a very like a lovely depiction of what it means to, like what colonization means, like on a physical, visceral way, and like the ramifications that it has. And I actually want to share something specific.
Please.
In my audience experience. One of the actors went out and they asked if anyone in the room was from India, because that's a central location in one of the skits that they do. And there was an individual sitting a couple seats down from me, and she said, I'm from there, but I'm very whitewashed. And the performer like sat with that and looked around the audience and then said, like, may I have
white?
But really allowed us to like hear this woman say, I'm from there, but I'm whitewashed. Like almost like, you don't want because he was asking for her hands, her spice, because they were looking for like Indian spice for the tea. It was kind of, that was the like absurdist plug line there. And then the performer said, like, will you still give me your spicy hands? Give me your spicy hands. You still have the spice. You still have, and it was just like this moment of like, wow, like, there's layers there that embedded in the clownery, or the, if you will, that really hit home.
Okay. So maybe some of that catharsis is dependent on what the audience gave, and maybe I just kind of was in a bit of a dud audience that didn't bring the same energy. I don't want to say that, like, it's not so much that, I guess my critique is that, I don't want to put the onus on subaltern populations to do all of the heavy lifting when it comes to reconciliation of the wounds of colonialism. But to me, I guess just because maybe, and this is sort of an imbalance between the marketing of the show and the final product itself, but it seemed like I really wanted to put that on the agenda. And I felt like I left this that was just a point and laugh fest, pointing and laughing at things that were already primed to laugh at, but didn't quite take the next step into thinking more critically about these things. And I would argue that most of the audience that at least I was present with are probably the types of people who've already begun that process of thinking, obviously come to no conclusions because none of us have in a lot of these regards. But, you know, it really, I guess, was a beginner's guide to this history. And maybe I think we could use a more intermediate guide to some of it. I do think it ended on a very potent image with some watermelon imagery and tableaus of violence that I think does a good job of indicating how a lot of the issues that are framed in this ossified historical lens are still going on to this day. That I think was a strong note to end on, but I kind of maybe wish there were more things like that peppered throughout the journey that maybe broke some of that seal of the historicity of something that is very much still present.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great note to end on at the moment. And
again, I really wanted to love this show. I'm sorry I didn't love it, but I do still think there's a lot of great things going for it. And the performers were excellent, fantastic clowns.
I definitely want to I would see this again for sure, like an afterlife. And like all the little points that we mentioned out of beefing things out and the intermediate next step of Colonial Circus. Sounds great.
Wonderful.
Moving on to our next piece.
Another circus.
Yes, next up we have Madame Winifred's Circus of Wonders by Theodore Borgo. And this was another Ryan Borgo. And this was seen by Ryan and Jill once again. So Ryan, summarize this beauty for us.
Okay, so I honestly actually didn't even think of this when I put these two shows next to each other, but so I wrote a piece on this one in intermission that it was one of my favorites of the pieces that I wrote. I feel like I summed up my thoughts very well and concisely there, which I don't necessarily want to repeat. But this is a surprisingly Marxist children's show, which I thought was a hoot. I was completely disarmed by this piece. I was not expecting it to be this. It really frames itself in a lot of its marketing as being just like Baby's first circus show, but what we are actually presented here is Baby's introduction to class consciousness. So we have this circus set up. Our ring mistress is Madame Winifred, played by Emily Elizabeth. And we find out pretty early on that she's recently staged a coup d'etat, against the former ringmaster of the circus, whose name is Christopher T. Pitts, aka Christy Pitts. Toronto pandering, we love it. They milk that joke for all it's worth. The whole troupe of the circus doesn't know what happened to their former ringmaster. They think he's lost, and they keep saying he must be found anytime his name comes up. But Madame Winifred knows what happened. She did something to dispose of him, that he is no longer in the picture, and now she's leading the circus. And we kind of find out sort of early on, but also as it goes on, about some of Christy Pitts' exploitative labor practices, which kind of makes the coup seem more and more justified as we go on. And this is all just like a very revolutionary setup for what ultimately becomes just like a funny, here's some wholesome, clownish circus characters who each have their own shtick and are trying to put on a good show. And this is exactly what we are presented with. But this kind of, we could call it a superstructure, if you will, of this kind of, radical politics of a circus led by Madame Winifred as this kind of Gramscian intellectual who takes a leadership position not to ingratiate herself, but rather to liberate her ideologically pacified comrades. Like, there's something really strangely radical about this piece that I thought was just a hoot. I'm the person who I kind of pulled this book off my shelf. When I was in high school, I wrote a book report about this kid's book, A Fly Went By, a picture book that I've been reading since I was a child, about how it's from the 1950s, and I wrote this whole high school book report about how it's an allegory for anti-McCarthyism and the Red Scare. So I feel like I've been training to review this particular play and other works like it for pretty much my whole life. But this is the mindset I approach to it. It's unclear how much of it is really thought through by the team, but regardless of whether or not it is, it's there. The text exists as it does. The author is dead and we have killed her. So but Okay, Jill, say some more stuff. I could go
No,
on about
yeah,
all the
yeah,
funny
yeah.
business.
I think I'll talk about the structure of the piece
Please.
because I loved that sort of at the pre-show, you had all of the different characters, which again are very individual. They each have their own specific skill that they perform in the circus, whether it be movement, whether it be fortune telling, whether it be stage manager. And then that again is showcased in their costumes and their gesture and their varying accents. So for being a kids show too, and having done a lot of children's theater myself, it was very refreshing seeing these like super stock, like every character has their own persona and their own individuality. And I think that's a very common in a lot of kids TV shows you see too, like the Backyardigans or like, Octonauts. Like everyone has their own thing that they're specialized in. And so again, with the audience being kids, that's the demographic to hit. Props off to the team for really going full throttle on mapping that out for our younger theater goer brains. So yeah, and the whole structure of the piece. So the pre-show, you have some of these characters walking around and getting to know the kids. And then the structure of the piece is you're introduced more thoroughly to each of these characters, and each character sort of gets like a 5 to 10 minute stint of showcasing their skill or announcing what they're fed up with the circus and so you get to know them even on a deeper level. And again, just having that sort of chunk by chunk structure for kids, I like what a brilliant way of introducing these tots to the theater, to the stage, to the circus tent. And then as Ryan is saying, there's for the adults in the room, we get the whole politics of it as well. And even the kids too, again, like, the Fringe audiences this year, they were in it to win it. Like almost every show I saw, audiences were like giving reactions, enthralled along for the ride. And so you even had little kids in this piece too, be like, oh, or like gasp or super chuckle
I think the
at
kids
jokes.
are getting the political undercurrents too.
Yeah.
I feel like it presents it in like a very digestible, kid-friendly, understandable way too. Like
definitely,
this is an introduction to revolutionary politics for your babies.
yes. Yeah, and then just performances across the board. Everyone was so rich. And again, like I said, like really sticking to, you could tell that this company did devise this together and each performer planted the seed for their own character because you could really see that from start to finish. And again, as a performer, I love watching devised pieces where you can tell like each individual had a pawn on the board from the very beginning because you can just see it radiate through their performances. So I especially want to shout out Reed Martin and Sarah Kaufman. Reed went to the same program that I did and been a part of some shows that we've mentioned on the Cup. Reed is such a glowing performer, takes all of her characters to the nth degree and isn't afraid to like puncture a piece, I guess is a good way of saying it. So her Cardo Nancy, she was the fortune teller. The kids were just absolutely eating her up, like just loving her frenzied like intensity. And then
she's
Sarah
also before you go on to Sarah Kaufman, what I loved about Reed is she played just like the world's worst detective in this.
Yes.
Like she has a whole subplot where she suspects something might be awry with Madame Winifred, that she's keeping some kind of secret from the rest of the troupe, which she is, but Cardo Nancy has not figured it out at all, even though she thinks she has it. It's just, it's what a wonderful bad detective role that gets to be funny and yet still sort of cracks the case open accidentally, which sorry, just so I could go on about each of the characters, but continue.
So I also want to shout out Sarah Kaufman as Cipollina, our stage manager. So Sarah's actually done a lot of stage management for TYT Theater, a company that I've done a lot of kids theater for. So it was lovely seeing her play a character of stage manager. And Cipollina, again, from like a kid's media point of view, there's always that character that is like the spine of the team. And that's kind of like, if you don't know what's going on, you turn to this character. And I just thought Sarah did a really good job of like popping up to the microphone downstage right to kind of introduce each circus act or character introduction, if you will. But then also there's some backstory and sort of heart-wrenching shadowed star quality about Cipollina that we get to see her arc at the end. She gets to do a duo with Mick Jangler, who is the Scottish instrumentalist that
my favorite character.
They end up doing a duo together. There's this animosity between them the whole piece, and then at the end they get to be the perfect pair. So just really varied characters in this piece too, which is such a delight to take in.
Yeah, I will say, Mick Jangler, played by Fiona Kane, my favorite character. I have been saying my wee Tam, just out of context, over her main plot point is she loses her favorite tambourine, which she refers to as her wee Tam. And that one line has been stuck in my head since seeing this show, and I just blurted out randomly to people who have no idea. I keep telling people, or at least while Fringe was still going on, I kept telling people, you gotta see Madame Winifred's Circus of Wonders. It's amazing. And nobody I talked to had seen this show. I feel it's they got patrons pick, so I think enough people knew to take their kids to this. So good job that they did something right in the marketing. But I feel like so many adults just dismiss this show as oh yeah, that's a little baby kiddie thing, and I almost did until I was sent by intermission. They included it among my assignments, and I was so glad I did because this was just freaking fantastic.
Yeah. I also want to talk about, just through the lens of the other two characters we haven't really chatted about, I'd like to bundle them together a bit. So we have Aunt, who was the character who was the movement specialist in the circus. And you find out she's a tap dancer. She's wearing tap shoes, but she also has tap shoes around or tethered to her costume. And you find out that she had a brother that used to tap dance with her, but got wrapped up in the circus laundry machine, which is such this wild, absurdist plot point. But she ends up putting on her brother's tap shoes on her hands and does the tap duo sequence with her hands and her feet. So I just think, again, through this character, there was defying expectations of what movement is or what creation can be, and how you can sort of kick down those boxes and break boundaries. And just because you don't have your partner beside you, you can do it on your own. But then you also, going back to Mac Jangler and Cipollina, two individuals can come together as a partnership. So there was that duality going on. But then what I also really liked too about Giplaw, which was our goblin, sort of trained goblin character, who ends up, spoiler alert, it's Christy Pitts the whole time. He was just magically turned into a goblin. So he's brought back as Christy Pitts. They discuss what actually happened. He gets welcomed to the circus, and instead of just being himself, he's you know what? I'd actually like to go back to being Giplaw too. And they're as a human, I'm yeah, I learned how to be a goblin. I can just take on the persona of that. And I was what a great way of also showcasing you can be whoever you want to be, regardless of kind of how society sees you. So again, kind of just tethering together with Ilala, you can make whatever you will of your own individual self.
I will say, I do think Giplaw's transformation back into Christy Pitts and him being totally cool with the fact that he was usurped by Madame Winifred, that she's doing a better job. It's a bit too tidy of an ending to the setup we're presented, but I do think for a kids show, there's nothing wrong with imagining a world in which our oppressors are less resistant towards change and more compliant to reimagining the social structures that organize the big circus we live in.
And the stage magic they did of bringing a white lit up shroud and having the characters kind of hold it up while we had this transformation from Giplaw to Christy. Oh, the kids were eating it up. It was an Elsa Frozen moment, it. Yeah.
Or Cinderella.
Yeah. Check marks across the board.
Yeah. I love this show. This show's so good. Maui Tam.
Maui Tam. That's Madame Winifred's Circus of Wonders. And yes, it did earn patrons pick for that venue. So again, a piece I would love to see filtered through our school systems. I think it's a lovely, fun hoot. And it's got a lot of layered messaging for our younger theater tots. Welcome to the theater. Amazing.
All right.
That's off for there. Take it away, Mac.
All right. Next one is one you and I did, Jill. And it is Rosamund, a new musical done by Chaos and Light. Here's our program here. Once again, extra bonus points to any show that has a program. It's always much appreciated. And so, yeah, Jill, you and I saw this one, and it is very much just a retelling of the Sleeping Beauty fairy tale. So, I mean, if you know that
Mm.
fairy tale, you kind of know where everything is going here with, it's baby born, evil fairy's going to come along, curse the child. Another fairy steps up to prevent the curse temporarily. The child turns the age of the curse. There is a brief time before the curse is enacted. The curse is enacted. She goes to sleep and then wakes up happily ever after. This is very much kind of like Brave meets Sleeping Beauty is the way I would describe it best, because we have a very kind of Merida styled Rosamund, aka Aurora,
we've got some
aka Briar Rose.
Needed agency and tenacity. That is Briar Rose for this piece. Yes. Princess Rosamund in this piece.
Yes, Princess Rosamund. And so this piece was written and directed by Andrew Seok.
Andrew Seok. Yeah, apologies
Andrew
for
Seok.
pronouncing. Yeah.
Yep. And so he also played the king in this production. And so he's written several other musicals, done also several short musicals as well. And so he did this. We had a live orchestra that included cello, percussion, piano, violin, and guitar. It starred the wonderful AJ Bridell. Gabby Epstein was in there.
Kyle
this
Brown.
Was actually
Kyle Brown.
Kyle Brown was in there as well. I mean, this was a solid cast all together. And I mean, I will say, out of all the musicals I saw this season, this was the one that I really loved, and I wish there was a cast recording for a few reasons. One, the music was beautiful. Andrew wrote very beautiful music in this piece. The other reason is the venue. This is one of those scenes where the venue kind of tripped up the show, because the show was beautiful. However, it was in an older church, which has very good acoustics, which reverberate sound really well. However, when you have a live orchestra playing on stage alongside your actors, sometimes the sound can be muffled, which then unfortunately meant you lost some of the beautiful lyrics. Like there's one song that Andrew sings as the king about the fact that he had to make decisions about the kingdom, and was he selfish, was he not selfish in his choices. And so that, I mean, you could see in his face, he was acting the hell out of it. There were certain points where I could hear the lyrics really clearly. And then there were a few other times when the lyrics got a bit lost because the sound mix was off in the space. So I wish they maybe were over in the Al Green or another venue that maybe had a bit more of a sound balance that could help with the piece, because it just sounded so beautiful. And there were so many great moments that I wish I just heard a bit clearer. There were a few plot elements I think need to be fleshed out a bit more in this. Like there's a whole subplot with the three good fairies, and that at one point one of them gets poisoned and is kind of taken out of the story. And then there's a whole backstory with Gabby's character that was beautiful, but I think could be fleshed out a bit further. I also wish her character, spoiler, didn't die. I wish it was her choice to reverse the prince's aging at the end, because the big plot twist of this, which had everybody in the audience choked up and crying. I saw Lindsay Middleton, friend of the Cup, after, or I didn't see her, but her and I messaged after, because her and I were both at the same show. And we both talked about how much we both like throughout the whole piece is kind of an into the woodsy thing where there's a narrator that opens the story. And you're always thinking, okay, he's just the narrator. He's not, a character in the story. But this version of this Sleeping Beauty adaptation did stick true to the original fairy tale, which is she sleeps for 100 years before she is awakened. Not by a kiss, but by the curse ending, which is a good consent update to the story. But that means that she will awake with no family, which is what happens in the original fairy tale. And the adaptation is that the fairies can put people to sleep. So they will awaken when the princess awakens. But that means, once again, thinking Game of Thrones politics, you can't put an entire kingdom to sleep and, have the entire monarchy removed from the politics of the time. There needs to be some rule left in place. And so our prince, who was played by, I believe, Jeff Irving, who was terrific. He kind of was a mix of Cinderella's prince from Into the Woods meets like kind of Prince Philip, like the better version, and also Flynn Rider, a bit of Flynn Rider.
I was going to say Flynn Rider, yeah.
He's a bit Flynn Ridery, but he steps up and says, I will stay and watch over the kingdom. And so there is a bit of a interesting transition with a stool, and it's revealed that the narrator is actually the aged prince who has
it's been him the whole time telling this story.
It's been him telling this entire story, and he is literally counting the hours, hoping to stay alive just long enough for her to awake and see him, because they did profess and love each other right before she fell asleep.
And David Rogers, who plays the narrator, everyone is like an epic singer, but that song at the end, Matt, I was blubbering. Like,
yep. Everybody around me, I was tearing up. The girls behind me were literally crying. It was the moment. And I would say, if Andrew wanted to go really dark with this, he should have let the prince stay dead and not brought him back. Because I was like, you've already gone dark with like killing off Gabby in a very dramatic way. You've already, gone with the original fairy tale of 100 years goes by. I'm like, let him stay dead. I was happy to let him be dead, not because I'm like, yay for death, but I'm like, it's so poetic that.
Yeah, because what they ended up doing was they turned like the curse. They ended up bringing
the 3
him
good
back
fairies bring him back
to the same age of Rosamund, because she's still young. So they kind of like do like it's kind of like a beast back into his princehood. It's like the narrator comes back.
It's a very, very happy ending thing, which I was like, okay, I get it. It's gotta be fairy tale happily ever after. But a lot of the original fairy tales were not all about happily ever after. It was about what's the moral of the story.
Right.
But I think having him die, so like at the end, does kind of speak to the fact that, throughout the whole piece, they're going to get together and they're fighting it, and they just don't want to say what they're feeling until it's too late. So I'm like, that actually is a good moral to a story too, of don't take life for granted, because in the fact that also the king and queen make a choice about sacrificing the kingdom kind of in the famine for the sake of a child, and not telling the truth to each other when they have the chance. I think that's a bigger moral of a story is, sacrifice is hard, but not saying how you feel and living in your truth has repercussions. And I think that would tie greater into the story with the king and his choices and what he's doing. Because I do feel for the king.
Me trying to follow this, having not seen the show, didn't he say how he felt? You said that they confessed their love to each other.
He falls asleep just as he's saying it. So she doesn't hear it, really.
I see.
You don't quite know if she heard it or not.
Yeah. But I guess
Joe, go.
No, it's okay. No. It's all good things. But I'm just thinking, for future life for this piece, like it's definitely marketed to. It could definitely be marketed to like families. Like I could see like Drayton or like Theater Aquarius like picking this up
for sure.
Because it definitely, not to say that we need to like sugarcoat an ending for kids, but it did seem like, wow, the next legs of this piece could definitely be like a family-oriented event. Again, like you said, Mac, it's like Sleeping Beauty meets Brave. Yeah. True. One thing I will say, we have not mentioned this.
So special is that Into the Woods has that raises it to that next level. And I think letting the prince die is that.
See, I don't know. I like the warmthness.
Into the Woods Junior though is special because it ends at Act 1.
That is true.
Yes, fair. But I want to say, we haven't mentioned this yet, but this piece was concert style. So it was not the story. Yes, the story could be fleshed out, but quite literally, I do want to take a moment and talk about the style in which this piece was presented, because it was at the St. Paul's and this beautiful church, and it had microphones downstage, and every character was wearing blacks, but it was a black the costume depicted the character that they were donning. And so I thought that was like beautifully aesthetically, just like in theater, like elevated, elegant theater blacks. And then the choreography to take from microphone to microphone and the sort of staged, gestured fight. There's a bunch of action sequences that Rosamund and the prince find themselves in. And it's through like Jeff and AJ, like they do
the carriage one at the beginning is so great.
It's like you're listening to a podcast and you're watching like an element of what the action scene could be, but it's just enough of physical theater that both the actors are giving at their own mic that is painting this beautiful picture. Like, it was storytelling, physical storytelling, precision, just with like, we're going to do this concert style, but it was like elevated concert style to the max, to the point, even Kyle Brown, massive shout out, one of the best performers we have in Canada right now.
Yep.
I'm going to say it.
And he plays like the ensemble roles in this. He's not even like the prince.
Kyle was in Tyson's song, which we just recently chatted about on the Cup as well. But
Jesus Christ Superstar,
Kyle has
Talk is Free.
Exactly. Jesus Christ Superstar, Talk is Free. And then comes into this piece and has like a plethora of ensemble roles that have all different accents, all different classes. And quite literally, there's a moment where he moves from stage right to stage left, and halfway through, he pivots and changes his character, and it goes completely opposite. And literally, I'm watching this and knowing Kyle's performance style, I straight up was like, oh my God, at center stage, he just completely changed his body posture, and he's about to be another. Yep, there it is. That's a completely different human that is donning that stage. So like, Kyle, massive shout out. I also do want to kind of have a nitpick with the book of this piece. I think the songs are brilliant and lovely, but I think some of the writing of the piece itself was a little bit too telling, or again, similar to an issue I had with Girls Night Cabin Fever of like, it could be shaved away, it could be shaved down, because there's moments where there was pieces of dialogue that seemed awkward and not needed. But when you have performers like AJ Bridell and Kyle Brown saying them, you're good. But I just think if this piece has legs with other performers, or if it goes on to be released for like schools to do and what have you, I think the book could be a little bit shaved down and stronger, like almost like having maybe like another dramaturg go over and sort of go in and excavate, just so that if you don't have super established ultra professional performers, because again, AJ Bridell is one of the best performers in Canada right now as well. If you don't have them behind your text, you might need to give the actors a little bit more precision with the text, I guess, is a way I'll say on that. But yeah, like the chemistry between everyone is. I also want to shout out Sapphire Dimitro. So a friend of mine, she played one of the fairies, Serena, who is the one that like is like the love bonding fairy. So a quite like pivotal role.
Is she the one that casts the protection spell that gets poisoned?
Yes. So
she had a beautiful voice.
Stunning voice. So Sapphire's partner Chiano, I did Rocky Horror with years back, and I constantly run into Chiano and Saph like just in the industry. And Sapphire, yes, is a stunning performer across the board.
I wanted more for her character.
So fun fact though, I saw this show on opening night and actually got to chat with Saph after. She came into that performance, came into this performance experience the day before.
Wow.
She learned that entire track. She was put in to Rosamund, a new musical, literally a day before.
That's incredible.
I would have never know that. And I'm like, I was gobsmacked. I was like, all right, I'm like number one fan already, but I'm like, that's astonishing because it was she's a pillar of the fairies. And the fact that again,
she's the most mature of them. And
zero stress, zero wavering, no performer anxiety of like, oh my God, she was just like professional with a capital P. So brilliant job, Sapphire.
And we also got to give a shout out to Gabby as well.
Yes, Gabby also been on the Cup.
She has. And I mean, just her characterization, because if you look at the promo website for this, they drew her with the Maleficent horns. So it's very easy for this character to become Maleficent-y, because that's such an iconic portrayal of the evil fairy.
But she actually has such an empathetic, sympathetic backstory.
She totally does.
She falls in love.
More.
Yeah, she falls in love with like a commoner, a peasant, and he's super ill. And what she wants to do, talk about like class things. She's frustrated that the monarchy isn't helping these folks, and like her heart is broken. So there really is like a deep-seated longing for the sort of mischief that she causes because it's personal and it is stab at the monarchy.
So you're saying she's the Madame Winifred of this musical?
Yeah, in a way, I guess.
I mean, she does it with this character voice that she puts on because she doesn't talk like that.
Yeah.
Like people can go back and watch The Cup; they'll know how she sounds.
Yeah.
Or Sweeney Todd episode, like she kind of talked like this the whole time. It's that kind of weirdly weird voice that you put on to be a character. But yeah, the pain she brought to that role was so great. But once again, because of the lack of staging a bit, I didn't know that like her song was a flashback song where we got to see her interaction with the peasant and things like that. Also, just the sound reverb once again threw it off a bit as well. Sure. But like, I would love that to be a more fleshed out. And that's why I was so sad to see her get killed off so early on in this piece. Not even early on. She was killed about midway through. But I was like, you set up such a more dynamic character there of this character who is not Maleficent, who needs to be slain by the prince, but should instead have the greater character choice of if she chooses to let the curse go forward and just watch what happens and sees the prince stay true to his word, because her whole thing is that the royal people don't stay true to their word, that they lie, and that they're untrustworthy rulers. But she sees someone who is that, and that ultimately changes her heart, going, "Oh, yeah, you're worthy of a change back." Which once again, that I think that would fix the ending of making it less. Oh look, and now all of a sudden the three good fairies have come back and turned him good, turned him young again. Which I was like, okay, like at least making it a Gabby character choice would give it a bit more meat, as it would.
So this piece has love. This piece has revenge. This piece has so action. Good. I would love to see it with a full costume and a full set, and you could tell
full orchestra
again,
as well.
The families in the audience were absolutely eating it up. So that's Rosamund, a new musical.
Bring it back. We love it. All right. Next up we have Toba Tek Singh, which was done by Dramatic Jukebox. And Ryan and Jill, you saw this one. So Ryan, give us a elevator pitch and let us know your thoughts.
So Toba Tek Singh is a new devised work based on a 1955 short story by the Pakistani author Sadat Hassan Manto. So it is fully devised by its company, a large 11-person ensemble led by its two directors, Dave Vilsoni and Ethan Persico, speaking of people who've been on the Cup. So this is an interesting one. So it is in many ways a very straightforward adaptation of the story that I imagine many people in Canada and Toronto, certainly people who don't come from South Asian descent, may not be familiar with. I read the short story the night before I knew I was going to see this show to kind of prime my adaptation brain for what I was in store for. But the story is interesting because it's set, I believe, in 1947, right after the partitioning of India and Pakistan. And it is very much centered around this psychiatric institution. It's referred to as a lunatic asylum in the text, but I don't really feel like that's the most appropriate language for it. It's in the town of Lahore. And the newly designed border put forward by the British colonial government on their way out of occupying these nations is throwing everyone's sense of national identity awry. They no longer can tell, this all used to be one country and now it's two. We're unclear, are we in Pakistan or Hindustan? And a lot of this, the whole plot is centered around this particular psychiatric institution who's going to have all of the Hindus and Sikhs relocated to another one, because now this is a Pakistani institution, so all the Muslims will stay, and all the Muslims from other institutions on the other side of the border are going to be move forward here. So it's really about the kinds of people that society brands as mad or undesirable in some way, who are the patients of this institution, trying to grapple with the madness of geopolitical volatility and understanding who am I when arbitrarily defined and set up borders can change what country you're in, the ground you're literally standing on from 1 minute to the next. There's an interesting line that shows up in the surtitle projections very early on in this piece that after the withdrawal of the British Empire, I'm paraphrasing here, but the exact quote that I wrote is, "People were bound by new rulers' borders." And that's very much what this piece is about, although I guess the irony of that line being that the borders themselves are a residue of the imperial rulers, even if they left in their tangible presence. The lasting legacy is very much ever present even after independence. So this is a piece that I already thought was very strong when I saw it, but the more I've ruminated on it since seeing it, the more I've actually come to appreciate it, and my interest in it has only grown. There's been quite a few just very potent images in it that have really stuck with me that I keep coming back to in my head. And yeah, like I unfortunately, this is one that I wrote about for intermission in the immediate aftermath of seeing it, and I had a lot I wanted to say that really got cut down, and I feel like I probably come across as very lukewarm in that review, but I'm trying to redeem myself here because I do feel like my feelings for it are a lot stronger than what that review might suggest. But what's kind of interesting about this piece is we have this large ensemble, and for the most part, they speak entirely in Hindi and Punjabi. And we are given these slow, stagnant scenes that prioritize atmosphere and vibes over plot. We're really kind of just invited to sit in the feelings of confusion and disorientation. And while they have English projected on surtitles, it is very rarely translating the lines that are being said by the characters on stage. More often than not, it's brief little narrations of explaining to the audience what's even happening in the scene. Often those are taken or extracted directly from the original short story itself, but sometimes they're not. But I kind of thought it was interesting if we're not given these surtitles to, allow the Anglophone audience, presumably Anglophone audience, to get a window in on what's being said. But it's almost this alienation, scoping out device of here's what's happening. We don't care if you can't keep up, and putting us in very much the similar mindset of what the characters are in. And yeah, the atmosphere that it creates is stunning. There's a lot of these very slow, gorgeous scenes where pretty much nothing's happening. And or at least it feels like nothing's happening, but it's kind of building just this vibe throughout. And I think like the original short story is interesting because there's not much of a clear through line of the plot. It's kind of just these little quippy barbs about this patient did this thing because of how concerned they are with the situation, and then moving on to another. It's like only halfway through the story, or maybe even over halfway through the story, that we even are introduced to its central character, and the remainder of the story is kind of just presented with an extended version of one of those barbs, but following him kind of throughout it. And something that I think is interesting also is that the short story is very satirical, and even though we are presented with literal lines from it projected onto the screen, this adaptation feels almost devoid of satire, that it's very earnest. It is just, instead of kind of making a bit of a farce of the absurdity of this political situation, it really wants you to feel what it must have been like to inhabit this political situation, that is absurd as it might seem when you reduce it to a bunch of little individual jabby vignettes, is like actually being like, okay, but these are real people who experienced the disorientation that we're now trying to take a page out of that history book and see if you can feel it yourself.
Yeah.
Jill, I've been talking a lot.
No, it's okay.
Like
pretty much everything that you said was my thoughts on all of that. So thank you for that. I do want to, again, I'm taking us to like the performance, the styles of things. Cause again, me being a performer myself, I feel like that's some good experience.
Like, broad scope story.
Exactly.
Yes.
This piece to me was the best physical theater in the Fringe that I saw. I just think, again, it was a massive ensemble, and the body contortions and the stage falls, the intimacy, which again, shout out to Davel and Ethan. I did an intimacy workshop with them with Siobhan Richardson. So that was sort of on the back of my brain of looking out for that in this piece. And I thought the way that they depicted violence and intimacy in this piece was beautifully done. And when I say beautifully, I mean, it was just enough of a disturbance to paint the pictures that needed to be painted, but not to detract the audience too much. Like I thought it was in a perfect middle ground of, using theatrical elements to show these like grotesque snapshots of history and snapshots of politics that are going on today. So that's another sort of hat tip I want to do to this piece of, telling a narrative, a piece of history that is about two opposing sides and borders being blurred and people being confused. that is a narrative that is all across our news platforms right now. And I won't even get into specifics because I think I know what we're all talking about. So beautiful, showcasing a piece of history that folks can either relate to or maybe don't even know much about, and then told through the lens of these patients that are already in such a confused state, and this idea of where do I go? Where do I belong? I want to stay. I want to be tethered to family, but I can't. Like, all of that is going on, and then exuded through like precise physicality and intimacy. Like, it was raw and heart-wrenching. And like you said, Ryan, too, with the elements of text being displayed every so often on the back psych of the space was a cool way. Cool is not the right word, obviously, but like an augmented experience for that. Like, I was so just enticed with what I was seeing on the stage. I didn't need to know verbally like what was going on. Like, I could say what was just by like the precision of the performers. But to have, again, as an adaptation from the short story, to have the text present behind and as kind of like roots to what this piece is, was like a lovely use of the Al Green space, like with such a big ensemble. I think like they utilize the entire stage. Yeah, I could go on and on about that,
right.
but
wonderful.
If I could chime on just a couple more things, just because there's one performer in particular I think who really stands out and deserves a special shout out. His name is Sarabjit Arora. And I wish I could shout out more of the cast members because they all do such a great job of creating the ensemble, but it's hard to kind of differentiate them as characters. But he plays the main character who we're kind of introduced to as a main character later on, Bishun Singh, the one from the town of Toba Tek Singh of the title. And he just has the most amazing stage presence. Even while in these massive ensemble scenes, he really is just constantly gravitating the eye towards himself. Every time he's speaking in a large scene, like, you can always pick out what he's saying, even if it's in a language you don't understand. And he very much kind of presents himself not just as the protagonist of the nested narrative that's adapted from the short story, but the final moments of the play are him breaking the frame. And he starts speaking in English, and he tells us the story of him, the actor's personal experience with the India-Pakistan border. He himself is Sikh, and he also kind of has this feeling of placelessness, and he talks about returning to the land that he's from or that his family comes from, and feeling this embodied visceral connection. And I think like one sort of like minor critique that I have of this piece is that I often felt like this, Jill, you talked about how there's, we can certainly relate in our heads certain political situations today that this might be an appropriate allegory for, which I struggle with that framing, because while it is certainly true, and I think apt, I also don't want to neuter this play of its cultural specificity. No. And I'm not suggesting that's what you're doing, but I also, part of my feeling with that is because it's so in the moment throughout most of it, this almost felt like a piece that could have been made in 1955 when the story was written. And especially with some of the things, maybe with the language around the perspectives on madness and insanity, I felt like there was a bit of a missing 21st century perspective, that we were sort of treating this kind of on its own terms, not necessarily problematizing the history, just presenting the history. But this final monologue is the refutation to that feeling that I was feeling, that it is showing that even this thing that is history, you don't have to detach it from its context to make it meaningful today. Its context is still very much meaningful today to the people who are living it and the people enacting it before us in this new adaptation. So big shout out to him, big shout out to the whole team. Just a stunning piece altogether.
I'd love to see, Toba Tek Singh. A theater company's got to pick this up for sure.
For sure.
Okay, moving on to our next.
Next up, we have Tape, which is by Jim and Gru Theater. Ryan and Jill, you saw this one. Ryan, give us a quick elevator pitch.
A quick one. Oh boy.
Well, I could do the elevator pitch for this if you'd like.
Sure,
Jill.
Sure. Okay.
Sure.
So this piece is a three-hander. You kind of start out. I kind of don't want to like spoil too much of this
I feel like
too.
I have to spoil it. There are things I need to talk about with this piece. You don't have to in your plot description if you want, but I'm going to spoil parts of this. I have to.
Okay.
Also, this play is from the 90s, so like it's been around for a while.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead then, Ryan?
Are you sure?
Yeah. Yep,
Okay.
just stay concise.
All right, so we are introduced to two characters, Vince, played by Thomas Saraginidis, apologies for pronunciations, and Joel Pettigrew, who plays John. And these are two old high school buddies who are reuniting in a hotel room in Lansing, Michigan, because John has recently made a movie. He's a filmmaker that is being presented in the Lansing Film Festival, and Vince has come to town to support his friend and see it, or so we think. But they kind of have this sort of like banter, catching up, there's a bit some judginess going on in this sort of somewhat fraught old friendship. They've drifted apart in a lot of ways. But the conversation starts turning on a woman from both of their past. Her name is Amy, played by Jada Rifkin. And
shout out to Jada. Sorry, good friends. Of Jada.
I'm gonna shout out Jada because she's incredible in this. But yeah, just plot summary, trying to be concise. Like So they start talking about Amy, and it seems like both of them were at some point romantically entangled with her during their high school days. And there's some kind of, wounds and old feelings there. And Vince is pretty convinced that when they were in high school, big content warning coming up here. If you don't want to hear talk about sexual assault, maybe just skip the rest of this segment and move on to the next show. I wish the show had given a similar content warning, but we'll talk about that too, maybe. Vince is convinced that when they were in high school that John raped Amy. And that is the kind of main thrust of the plot. The show is called Tape, and it takes a while to figure out what that title is referring to. But over the course of like a good half hour of conversation, we find out that Vince has been taping the conversation and he's trying to get a confession out of John. And what starts out with a lot of denial ultimately does produce a confession, and Vince gets it on tape, and their friendship is pretty much over. But now the question is, well, what are you going to do with this information? Because it turns out that Amy lives in Lansing, Michigan, and she's an assistant district attorney. And Vince has actually called her up, and he wants to see her. And he's holding a tape with a confession from John for what he did to her back in high school. And then eventually she joins the scene, played by the amazing Jada Rifkin, who is, I think, the MVP of this production. Even I wish she was in it more. But she begins to cast doubt on some of what seems so certain in the confession. And I guess we can maybe stop the summary there, but it becomes this.
It almost sounds like a prequel version of 4 minutes, 12 seconds.
I was going to say that because that actually does feel like an apt comparison, a play that we recently reviewed here on the Cub.
And I will actually amend that, Ryan. She doesn't cast doubt. She straight up says that she was not.
Which is
I think there's a layered sort of agency and clapbackedness that this piece does for the male depiction and saviordom when it comes to assault.
100%. Sorry, this is why we can't talk about this play without spoiling it, because so I said before that I wish they had better content warnings for this. They had the Fringe volunteers say something about like listing content warnings and one other one. Like, you should probably tell people what the other one is. I get that it's supposed to be a spoil, like that would be a spoiler, and it's supposed to be a surprise in the plot when you learn it's going that direction, but there's better ways. Crows often does things where, please ask us if you have known triggers and we'll tell you about it, and I wish they had primed their audiences for this a little better. But yeah, this is a play. It was written in the 90s by Stephen Belber, who I was wondering why that name sounded familiar. And he was actually part of the team that made the Laramie Project. That's why that name sounds familiar. I didn't realize that this was an old play until well after I saw it. It was in fact made into a film by Richard Linklater in the year 2001, starring Ethan Hawke, Robert Sean Leonard, and Uma Thurman. And this, finding out that this is from the late 90s, kind of licks some of what I thought was a little strange and iffy with this one. I liked it overall, but I didn't love it. I do think it was a tough one for me to get a bit of a handle on. Something that I'll just start off that I thought was really impressive, especially starting with our two male actors before we heap more praise onto Jada, is that I think they did a very good job, the two of them, of establishing the history between these two characters. They did something that I also, after I saw the show, I watched the movie because I was curious. And they don't do this in the movie, so I think it is unique to their performances and the direction by Lucas James, where they built in things that seem like inside jokes between these characters that the audience does not get, but we get that they get it. Like they
Right.
almost picked random lines from the script to treat like that's an inside joke and play up the fact that they're laughing about this thing that we would have never thought. And like, I don't think they're written as such. So I think that like they did a very good job of establishing this history, camaraderie, and friendship, which the play is about to completely dismantle. But yeah, but in terms of performances, yeah, Jada, I think, like I said, she's the MVP. Everybody needs to rush out to see her in the Thanksgiving play in the Off-Murder season coming this fall. It's all in the eyes. She does some amazing things just with the way she moves her eyes in relation to certain lines. And why I kind of used the phrase cast doubt earlier is because watching the movie after the fact, Uma Thurman seems to have committed to a version of the performance where I believe that she decided in her character work that the rape actually did happen, which is interesting because the script, I think, is written in a way to deliberately keep it ambiguous. But I think Jada, I would argue, committed to a version where it didn't happen. And I think that's no shade to Uma Thurman, but I honestly think that's the better call.
Absolutely. It's just more layered and
yeah.
But it's an episode of Screenplays, Ryan.
It's not good enough, honestly, for me to want to do that. But like the play, the movie, it is. Richard Linklater made it literally between my two favorite movies from his filmography, Waking Life and School of Rock. One of which I think is the best movie ever made. So you can guess which one. It's School of Rock. I love Waking Life, but School of Rock is my favorite movie ever. But yeah, so it's like, listen. So some critics I was reading about this said that the script feels like a relic from another time, which I think there's certainly truth to that. And I think that was part of why, for the technology of the title is pretty analog, even though I feel like they were trying to bring it more into the present in this staging. But I question the claim that some critics have made that this maybe feels like ill-suited material for the post-Me Too world. Because I think, credit where it's due, this play, it feels strangely ahead of its time in a lot of regards and not in others. But like, yeah, it's Jill, I think this is what you were getting at earlier, but it's specifically about men trying to hold each other accountable for past wrongs, especially those of a sexual nature. But also Vince's sense of justice is so rooted in his own entitlement that he can't wrap his head around the fact that Amy would have slept with John. That's why he's kind of built this rape narrative in his head. Because when they were dating, she wouldn't sleep with him. So he assumes that John must have forced himself on her because why wouldn't she have slept with me otherwise? So, and the play does explicitly call him out for that mentality. It's not vindicating him for thinking that. And it really does take men to task for imposing their own understanding of past events, even at the cost of overriding the agency of the women that they're ostensibly trying to help. This does feel like a scathing critique of the male savior mentality. And I don't think necessarily like Uma Thurman's interpretation of it is wrong, because I think she's still allowed to have agency to recast these events in her head when she does explicitly deny that it happens, but it almost gives too much credence to John's version when he does accept that I did a bad thing and he refuses to let Amy tell him that he doesn't get to decide if he raped her. And it's, please, Jill, I'm scrambling.
Sorry,
here.
I'm like... Well, I'm like, I will talk now.
Please.
You've basically said everything that I would say, but I just want to say, like, the entanglement of this piece is astonishing to me. Like, you find out more and more about each of these characters as it goes on, and it just gets deeper and deeper. And you're like, you don't really know. You're just in on the same thing as all of those characters. Like, they don't really know what is the truth and what isn't. And you as the audience member don't really know that either. Like, it's this constant tango and entanglement and power shift. There's a lot of like status shifting that goes on in this, that again, from a performance lens, like I think all of the actors did a really good job of painting this like triangle of status shifts throughout the whole piece to really just elevate all of the sort of dramaturgicalness you just broke down, Ryan. And yeah, again, it being on the Al Green stage too, it kind of like how the audience is set up. We're all in a raked position. So we're kind of like peering down or peering into this display case, which is just Vince's like motel room. So yeah, I thought it was like, we were kind of like gawkers, observers of like this very interwoven, entangled mess, if you will. And yeah, I just want to again shout out Jada. Like, you could totally tell her character work with this, and the agency and strength that she brings to this character, kind of taking, I don't even want to say like from like taking these men to task. It's just quite literally like bold face saying like, you don't get to write my story. Like her character is like, that was sex, but the men in the room seem to think it was assault. And again, that opens up that whole can of worms of there's a lack of communication. That's the big red sort of blaring flag here of like communication and consent should have happened from the get-go. Yeah, that's basically
and part of, I guess,
there we go.
Well, part of what I think is maybe the problem with that too is just the way that this play, it kind of ultimately, even while it's trying to condemn the men for the way they're interpreting the story, it almost kind of would be swung to give permissibility for men's violent actions taken without explicit consent. Because if she's telling him that, no, you didn't rape me, that was just sex, then it kind of, there is a bit of a vindication for maybe other men, hypothetical men in the audience who might be thinking, oh, therefore my situation could have been the same. And I think it's iffy and problematic in a lot of ways. I don't think this play really does hold up, and which is why I think it does feel like such a relic, but I will give it kudos for being ahead of its time and placing the agency squarely back in the female character to
definitely
recontextualize these histories on her own terms. And she gets like a great moment at the end where she wins the story, I guess is how we could see those final moments.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a weird one, but that's my weird thoughts.
That was tape.
That's tape.
All right. Okay. Next up, we have another musical. It's a musical. And it is Rooted, a musical poem. And this was by Black Man Productions. Ryan and Jill saw this one. Ryan, give us your classic Ryan Borochovitz elevator pitch summary.
Okay, so Rooted, a musical poem is written by Joelle Blackman, who also wrote Boy Boy and the Magic Drum, which we talked about in part one. She had 2 musicals in the Fringe, both based on children's books. This one is a very loose adaptation of The Giving Tree, the classic Shel Silverstein children's book, although it seems like a very unlicensed adaptation thereof, kind of treating it more as a jumping off point for inspiration, more so than an explicit staging thereof. They use the term living tree in a lot of the main songs as opposed to giving tree. So, file off the serial numbers. But I do think like this is a very strong piece. So it's basically presenting the child's relationship to the tree as we might think is familiar from that story, but also de-allegorizing that story into pairing it with a more literal representation of this thing that it was always sort of an allegory about, which is children's relationships to their parents. And whereas the original book very much frames this as a resource extraction fable about the things that the tree provides for the child, this is a lot more about the quality time spent together, both the kid with the tree and the child with her mother and father, and then going through generations later towards her own son when she grows up. And yeah, I thought this was a very strong piece. Jill, you saw this too. Anything you want to please chime in?
Yeah, so I knew a lot of folks involved in this piece. So Sasha Dennis, who directed the piece, and then Mateo Chavez Lewis, who I just did Tommy Rhodes the musical with, was the musical director. And a lot of the performers, Lizzie Song, Davis, Hadassa, the list goes on, beautifully performed and executed. One of the framing devices of this piece is you follow our narrator ends up being the sort of like oldest version of the girl that we sort of see played by 3 different actors. And again, through the choreography and the transitions of weaving that story, I thought it was like seamless. Again, this was staged, but like presented more on a concert level. There definitely, like I said, was gestured choreography, but again, it was in the theater, the Tarragon extra space. So just within that space alone, there's only so much you can do. And I think through like the costume changes and like I said, the physicality of executing the different branches of the trees were all like beautifully woven. There's an image that I think will forever live in my mind is there's this sort of tech box in the middle of the space that is doubling as the tree's roots, which you don't really know at first. You just think, okay, this is a tech trunk that they're going to be pulling costume pieces out of and just utilizing as an on-stage, backstage in a sort of way. And then as the piece kind of goes on, like microphone cords come out and sort of are strewn across the stage. And you sort of get a final image at the end of them all doing this sort of weaving choreography. And it's the roots. It's the roots of the tree. And then the fact that they're microphone cords of like, you know, each individual performer is rooting this piece in some shape or form. And so again, it was that layer of precision and that layer of professionalism and that layer of just going one step beyond what this piece could just be at face value. Again, that's in Sasha's direction, possibly also in Jewel's like vision. And then just the way that the performers executed that was wonderful. And the songs I was dancing and singing the songs. They're still baked in my brain. And yeah, I would love to see this particular piece have a bit more of a life, just because again, the genre of music too is a bit like Hamilton-esque too. It's quippy. It's got like some rap vibes. The riffs in this musical, I want to grab the score because I'm like, I want to do all of these riffs. Yeah, I could go on and on. This also had a live orchestra in the back that was directed and helmed by Matteo. And I got to meet some of the musicians before going in, and such like warm individuals, and just tethered the piece in such a grounded way. You could really tell this cast was rooted all together. Yeah. Anything else you want to add, Ryan?
I honestly, you've kind of taken the words out of my mouth. Yeah, this strong piece, been kind of humming the tunes. My only kind of the best critique I could come up for is I wish it was longer and I wish it was on a bigger stage, because it really is 45 minutes. You're kind of in and out, whereas I feel like with a title like Rooted and the way they talk about what we get from other generations, I'd almost like to see this family tree extend out further.
Definitely.
Like, let's hear about how you're rooted by the people, not just your parents, but who came even before them. I think there's a lot of history that's left on the table that a longer version could flesh out. Give us more songs. I'll listen to way more. And I do feel like in the Tarragon extra space, it was kind of a little claustrophobic and sort of too confined. I feel like they made great stage images, especially with the branches and the roots of the tree. But I would like to see, you know, a version of it that could really explode out into the space larger, but if they had more space on a larger stage. So yeah, if my biggest complaint about the show is I wish to see more of it on larger stages, then I think they really got something. And similar to Boy Boy, I feel like this is one that also could be targeted more so at kids. That I think I don't think you need to change a thing about it, but I think there is the familiarity with the children's book will sell it in that regard, and also then all the parents will be crying too, which is very apropos of the book that it's based on.
Yeah, a couple sentences you said like exploded, and I will say the piece, when I saw this piece, it was their closing. So I got to have that delicious extra layer of performers knowing this is the last time they're going to get a crack at this at the Fringe. And so I had that like extra explosion of energy and effervescence, and actually talked to Maharasa after the piece. She went to the same training program as I did a couple years behind me, and her and I were just catching up, and I was, you know, showering her with so much praise. And she was like, yeah, everything was spot on tonight too. Like every element was, again, I'm going to use it again, was like rooted together in the same tree. And you could just really feel that pulse. And everyone was there was a standing ovation. Everyone was on their feet, tapping their feet, clapping their hands. So it was magic. Like in that tiny space, the walls were just glittering. Yeah.
Love that.
So that's Rooted, a musical poem.
Rooted.
Moving
Wonderful.
on, Mac, take it away.
Yeah, we got something a little bit raunchy, you know. Not really though. It is Desperate Measures by Desperate Measures Collective. And fun fact, Trudy, who we just interviewed for the Cup, she did a production of this earlier at another Fringe festival. So
great.
There you go. But no, this piece was directed by Rachel Moore and was created by Rachel Moore and Catherine Tuckman. And basically, elevator pitch, Amy and Peter are a young couple. She is a ER nurse. He is a out-of-work opera singer after lip syncing to the lead actor on stage. And she is pregnant with their first child, Amy is. And so to make money, because ER nurse, unfortunately, does not pay the bills, and opera singer does not either. So to make money, she decides to sell her underwear or panties, as they say in the show. Jill, I don't know I don't know if you don't like the word panties. I'm not sure. Are you okay with the
Oh
word?
no, we can panties. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
Awesome.
Because
So
that's
sure,
the
'cause
thing.
lots of people
It
are
is
like
such a
cringy
thing
on
now
that
to sell
word.
your panties.
Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
total thing. I mean, I just want to make sure you weren't like every time I say panties, you're not like cringing at the word of it. Because people hate
We
that
love the
word.
panties.
Being on the panties. Yes, but anyway, so she decides to sell her panties, and from there, hijinks ensue from, first of all, Peter finding out, to then Peter taking over the marketing of the business because he is out of work and staying home, in order to keep up with the demand for the product. He starts wearing some of the panties and selling them off as hers.
Yeah.
To then taking special offers, including one that smells like sauerkraut.
Yeah.
To then, the big twist is that the mother-in-law, Peter's mother, who's been visiting throughout the whole show, you think she's going to find out, but she doesn't. No. But basically, there's a negative review that happens, and Amy, rightfully so, claps back at this, and that makes her go viral. And so now their orders like really skyrocket out of control. And one of the orders, as Peter discovers, goes to his parents' place. And then the question is, well, did they get your panties, Amy, or Peter's panties? And then it's which of my parents are cheating on the other by ordering the panties? Twist of it all, the mother ordered the panties, but she washed them to wear them herself, but she did it to support this nurse because she did not like the way the media was criticizing this nurse for trying to make extra money because she feels that nurses are underpaid, which they definitely are. Pay your nurses, people. Pay your nurses. They deserve it. They do
like tip your nurses. So what do you say? Give nurses a
Either way, that is the entire show. Ultimately, there's other moral, ethical questions that get into it, like after the baby comes, will Amy keep going at this? Because clearly she is enjoying not only the adoration she's getting, but also the freedom and control she's getting from this too. So yeah, I mean, before I kind of go further into my notes, Jill, what were your thoughts?
This piece, I wouldn't do anything to. Ryan, I wish you saw this piece because I think script-wise, there isn't anything I would add or subtract.
There's one scene I would get rid of.
Okay, sure. In my opinion, I thought it was perfectly written. Again, it's the Theatre Pass Marais backspace, so another one of our smaller spaces. Yeah. But what they did was they just had moving boxes, or like moving
Amazon
boxes, Amazon boxes. That was their like main step pieces, and it kind of it made sense because it evolved into like this is their workspace where they're getting all these orders of panties, and they have to turn around all these orders, and it was just them. A lot of two-hander scenes coming in, and again, we didn't need this like huge accoutramented space. We just needed the sort of like relationship and dialogue, and they had red panties where that was the only colored panties that they purchased. So we had that like poignant symbol of like this red, huge amounts of red panties. Also, like there was a coffee mug that had a red interior, like there were pops of red happening.
All the scene transitions were in red.
Yes, all the scene transitions were in red. And that's the one thing, I guess, like from the transitions, sometimes when we went from one scene to the other, I think the performers did a really good job of like stylizing. Like if we ended on a flirty moment,
going
they
with
like
that sniffing music
moved. Yes. Oh my gosh. It was like a sniffing soundscape of like a sniffing and like moaning, like to take us bit by bit. And those moments were a bit kind of awkward, but it kind of like added to the flavor of what the piece was doing too. But yeah, great utilization of the space. Hillary, who plays Amy, she obviously has a pregnant belly. And I thought she did a wonderful job of navigating that. One thing that irks me to the high heavens is when you are playing a pregnant character and you don't utilize your entire physical instrument as the actor to depict a pregnant person. And I thought Hillary absolutely hit that mark. And then also Cameron playing Pete, his delivery, his comedy, he's got one of those like super out there faces when he performs too. And so like, I was captivated again being in that tiny space by all of his facial gestures. Yeah. And again, these little twists and turns, like you don't know that he's going to take on wearing some of the panties too. And when they have their sort of like a couple dispute, this is like a super quirky kind of fun loving couple, but then they do have like that argument, and it is like a deep-seated,
it's a good one.
argument. So yeah, like props to a piece that didn't have very many props, but it absolutely struck the mark. Any more notes on your end, Matt?
A few. So I would say, there's one scene in the show that I felt didn't quite work. And that's the moon scene, the praying to the moon god scene with the candles. And that one kind of got a little bit too zany and a little bit didn't quite, because it kind of felt like a repeat scene of.
He's like trying to hoax just for Ryan's context, there's like a opera singer who keeps getting the roles that he wants to get. So he's trying to like hoax him.
He's manifesting.
This, like, Pentagon, like candlelit sequence.
Yeah, he's trying things. Also, Lisa Randall as the mother was terrific.
Yes.
Thoroughly enjoyed that. And I will say, this is one of those pieces, just like Girls Night Cabin Fever, that I thought would be a perfect film franchise story, kind of like another version of The Hangover. Yes, I sat there and went, there are 3 separate times I went, that's the end of a television season. You could easily expand this.
I was about to say that this could be a TV series.
Yep, CBC picked this up. You could easily make 3 to 4 seasons out of this. Like basically end the first season with Peter choosing to wear the panties for the first time.
Yes.
Second season is like the negative review and the clapback and kind of the escalation there. Third season is like,
Third season's with the baby.
Where
the baby is born, and how do they do this?
Actually, I would say season 4 could be that. Season 3 would be the mother and the buying of the panties and not knowing who it is.
True.
So like showrunner Mac has mapped it all out. You got this figured out.
He's got his red.
Listen, I would love to be a showrunner on a TV show. That's like one of my dream jobs.
It is.
Yeah, and I will say I appreciate the fact this show didn't go for the sex, because so easily we could have sexualized this piece, because just reading the plot description of they're selling their panties, it's like, oh, very salacious, very sexy. And obviously both Cameron and Hillary are very attractive, wonderful looking performers. So it's like you could easily have gone into the very sexualized realm with this. But the fact that because there are scenes where they're taking the underwear off mid-scene because they have to keep up with product demand. So they have to time it for a certain amount of time, take it off, get the next pair on. And so basically they're in bathrobes during the scene. But obviously they're wearing bodysuits underneath. But it's like you could have easly sexualized this in a different direction. So I really appreciate the fact.
Yeah, it was just kind of like a quirky
coordinator on in their rehearsals. But I assume they probably would, because of how sexual this could be.
Yeah.
But they were terrific. I mean, this was such a well done piece that I thoroughly enjoyed this. The cast had great chemistry. Lisa, Cameron, Hillary, all were wonderful together. And I could so see this piece growing and going places. Like, this is such a rich piece. Like CBC, you had it, like you had Kim's Convenience, you had Schitt's Creek. This could easily fit in like
definitely. I agree.
Styled show, like small,
quirky,
cast, add like a few best friends in there, add the dad, Peter's dad in there, fill up the cast a little bit. But other than that, you got a solid team. Eugene Levy, play the dad in this.
There we go. We love that. Yeah. What a quirky, average, it's just like a quirky average couple that's taking on this giant entrepreneurial
set in Toronto
adventure.
with CP24.
Yeah. And again, this was an audience experience too, that everyone was cackling and so in on all of the quippy jokes and whimsicalness that the actors I would say the script was so brilliant that you could put this in any actor's mouth and it would just skyrocket for sure. Great.
Jill wants to maybe be cast in a future revival.
There we go. I mean, I would.
In the TV series.
Listen, in the TV series. Then I won't have to take on the task of potentially selling my panties, which I don't do. But listen, you can make a lot of money doing that. So I don't.
You absolutely can, Jill. If you got to do that,
get on.
It's an honorable trade. Yeah.
All right.
On that note,
out. Desperate Measures.
Yeah. All right. Next one is Crosstown. Yeah. Next up is Crosstown by @n @f @n @ and I think I said their company name right.
Yeah, and your guess is as good as mine.
Okay, and this is a Ryan and Jill one. So Ryan, elevator pitch us. What do we got?
Okay, trying to be short with this one. I think I sent Jill an 11-minute audio message unpacking my feelings about it after seeing it.
Oh boy,
I'll do my best.
We'll include them all here.
So this is a one-man solo performance adapted and performed by H.R.H. Anand Rajaram, a very well-regarded, very talented actor that you've likely seen if you attend a lot of Toronto theatre. It's adapted from a book, this book, Crosstown, of the same name, by Richard Scrimgeour, which I read in the week leading up to seeing this show, part of why I have so many thoughts about it. So this is essentially the story of I'm trying to keep it concise, so bear with me. This is the story of an unhoused person in the kind of present day sequences, you could say, whose the mission that he's been living in is getting shut down, and he's missed the bus that's relocating all of its inhabitants to another mission on the other side of town. This is set in Toronto, very Toronto. And so the book is very much a kind of structured like Homer's Odyssey journey of him trying to get from one location to the next and meeting all kinds of bizarre characters along the way. And it kind of becomes this documentation of present day urban poverty. But then it also kind of cuts back in time to this individual, whose name is Mitchell, by the way, his life before being unhoused, where he was a rising star obstetrician. And he had a wife and a daughter, and something must have gone terribly wrong for his life to create this big pivot. And we get little hints throughout the story. But I think what's also very interesting is that this performance excises so much of those present day homelessness sequences and uses it kind of as a framing device to treat the backstory as the main thrust of the story, where we learn so much about his previous life and the big regrets and situations that I could and probably will want to get into more detail on. But Jill, I'll kind of lob it to you because I'm kind of curious here. In Anand's performance, he completely, and in the way he wrote the adaptation, he's completely removed the first person narration that is so innate to the novel. And he's really just extracted the dialogue and added some of his own where necessary to flesh out scenes. But he's performing it just himself. He jumps between characters just by the change of tone of voice and posture. I'm kind of curious to hear from you. How did you find getting into the story? Did you think it was easy to follow along what's happening? Did it take you a while to kind of get your teeth into what's really going on? I'd be very curious to hear the perspective of someone who, like most people, other than me, who didn't read the book. Yeah. I'm in the minority there, I realized.
I mean, no, so Anand, like, we reviewed on the Cup It's a Wonderful Life, where again, like a lot of it, that's just like standing at a mic and vocalizing and being different characters. So like I already knew that I was in for a treat of like, this performer is going to illuminate this piece, and very specific. And like, again, I talked about this with Brown's performance of Rosamund, of this like switching characters on as you turn your body. Like, and so Anand's like sitting on the stool, and literally his vocal quality and posture changes even so slightly, but it is a completely different character. So the whole time I knew I was just going to be like captivated, almost like watching a live audio drama or watching like a podcast. And I knew very little about this piece just going in. I knew there was trigger warnings, and again, trigger warnings for this episode of abortion. So similar to what Ryan said about the assault portion of this Cup episode. If you would like to just go to the next segment, we are going to be chatting about abortion here. So we kind of get that knowledge going into it. But then other than that, like I had no idea what the story was going to be about. And wow, was it storytelling as it's like at its finest, because we're catapulted between present day and these sort of flashback moments, or what you think are flashback moments. And I was never sitting there wondering like, who is this? Or like, where are we? Now I wasn't necessarily quite sure of like why the framing device was doing this, but I knew very just detective smart brain of me, I guess, knew early on that the homeless person we were following was this doctor. Like I found that out really quickly. So I guess instantly I was on the bit of like, how did he get to where he is now? And so, but never was I lost in what the story was or the plot. And again, in these flashback moments, or these snapshotted moments, of which you find out are Mitch's some of them are his fantasied scenes in his head. Spoiler alert. Again, each scene, in my opinion, could be just shelled as its own thing. And then it wasn't till the very end that I was able to digest and process all of the scenes, if that made sense. Like, I was taking them in as they were and sort of filing them away in a filing cabinet, if you will. And then after the show and days after, and may I say even weeks after, I'm placing things together of like, oh my goodness, the way that he punched that moment, that it truly was telling, that took us to the next moment. And yeah, so I would love to read the book just to kind of get another version of what was going on, but I was never at a standstill. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the book is interesting, and I enjoyed the book. There's a lot of weird things about it that I maybe enjoyed less. But this, again, you've already put out the content warning, so I think I kind of really do need to spoil some things about this, because I finished reading the book and it kind of, I don't know a lot about the author, Richard Scrimger. He actually wrote a series of children's books that I read when I was a kid, The Nose from Jupiter, which I thought that was a weird throwback. But I don't know what his stances or politics are, but the book arguably ends on what I would call a kind of anti-abortion message, which is strange and problematic and made me feel weird about this thing that I was enjoying prior to that point. Because, again, I'll try my best to spoil, having not given the most robust plot description, but the main character, being an obstetrician, he would occasionally administer abortions as part of his job, and the character is progressive and understanding that this is necessary plenty of times. But the plot hinges on a sort of late stage situation where he brings the baby to term to give birth to a very premature baby that he was expecting would just die instantly upon birth. But then when it doesn't, we find in the flashback sequences that he makes the split-second decision to put it on life support and bring this child back to life, contrary to the mother's wishes. And then that child, we kind of learn about him growing up. His name is Leon, little Leon Opara. And the plot ultimately gets to the point where a fire happens that we think is likely to kill Mitch's family, because we've gotten hints in some of the present day sequences that sort of signpost that. And we know that something terrible must have happened to get him where he is. And yet, when the fire does happen and the whole house burns down, his wife and daughter are saved by the now elder teenage Leon Opara. So it's almost like the great choice that he made in that moment to save this child, a child who was kind of a shit for most of his life to that point, turned out to pay off in a way because it was the saving grace that saved his family. But then we're given the gut punch that things didn't shake out the way we've been told it, that we've been told a kind of fantasy delusional version of this story, that indeed, instead of saving the nearly but not quite stillborn baby, he decides to put it out of its misery by smothering it with a pillow. And that we are kind of led to believe is the actual version of events. So everything we've seen prior to that point is presented as the version that the way his life could have been if he didn't kill this one baby. And while that certainly isn't an abortion, if life begins at birth, that's just kind of murder at that point, even if it is a mercy killing. There's a lot of things about abortion in the book that kind of frame that within a pro-life anti-abortion rhetoric. And there's like a protest scene where the present day homeless Mitchell finds himself in the middle of an anti-abortion protest, and he sees all this overwhelming imagery on the posters and the signs, and he breaks down and says, like, I'm sorry. So clearly he's thinking about what he did to baby Leon, or perhaps all the other abortions that he administered during his career. So it's very much framing his greatest regret in life is this abortion-like event that he participated in. And in reality, the kind of interesting thing about it is that there's actually no causal relationship between the two things that the plot hinges on: the death of his family in this fire and his decision to kill this baby, put it out of its misery. But in the version that he's told in his head, he connects them out of kind of treating it like a cosmic punishment, that the worst thing that ever happened to him, losing his family, could have been avoided if he didn't do the thing that he regrets most, i.e. killing this child. And it's very strange because, there's no way that, or it's so improbable that things would have turned out that way if he had acted differently and saved the child's life. He's clearly feeling guilt for what he did and thinks that losing his family is the universe punishing him for that. And it's so strange. And anyway, that's the book basically. But the play, Anand, he did a very good job of cutting a lot of this out. It's still there. The baggage of it is so central to the narrative, but I think he really found, he's obviously a very progressive person. He delivered one of the best land acknowledgements before this show that isn't written by Cliff Cardinal that I think I've ever seen. He's clearly, I don't think he's a pro-lifer in his heart of hearts. But I think he did a very good job of actually kind of making the story still work within this kind of narratological moral logic that is set up by the source, but making it feel less problematic and less iffy in that way. I would love to sit down and speak with him about it, and probably will sometime in the future. Maybe he and I have already begun talking about that because this is too short a forum for me to get into everything I want to and need to say about this piece. But this is an extraordinary performance, an excellent adaptation, flawlessly performed by one of our most talented actors. Jill, so I've been talking a lot. Please say more.
No, that you've taken the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what it is. I obviously have qualms and grapplings about this piece. Even just the story itself. I want to ask, why was it written? Why is it written the way that it's written? Why does it exist? There's definitely questions and dialogue to be had just about the content of this piece in general, like you're saying, but just the sheer brilliance of adapting what you described to me, Ryan, what the book is, and then placing it all inside one performer's mouth and then performing it the way that he did, in just a bare bones storytelling format. And everyone was in on it and fully focused, and people were emotional and disturbed and confused, but it's definitely a piece content wise, it will do that. And you're definitely going to leave reflecting and having questions. And Anand does a really good job too of being I will be out in the space to have conversations post show. So I love there's that offering there's that extension of conversation that can be had. And if you can experience this piece on your own and have thoughts and conversations, it's super important.
It's already received a short remount or extension after Fringe, co-produced by Video Cabaret and Dopo Lavoro Teatral, who also did You Hamlet that we talked about in episode 1 of this roundup.
Right.
But I think it was only a short 3-day stint. This episode is coming out even after that, but somebody has to pick this up. This is just too good to just let kind of sit by the wayside. And what a magnetic performance. Jeez,
definitely.
Wonderful.
Okay, bringing us
home
into our
stretch, last one of the night. The last show, Jill. It's Monks by Good Fortune. Ryan and Jill, take us home. Jill, you want to summarize this one?
Brother Critic, would you like to?
Brother Critic, Brother Orange Shirt, and Brother Jean Shirt will tell you what about the Brotherhood. Okay, best of Fringe for me. Hands down. So essentially what it is, this was in the Tarragon Solo Room, and you have these two actors, Veronica and Annie. I'm just going to talk about them as a first name basis because they're both super cool and chill and they play monks, and they're in the space, and it's just, again, this is one of our clown absurdist piece of the Fringe. And they introduce themselves. So basically the fourth wall absolutely does not exist in this piece. Everybody in the audience is depicted as brother whatever. So I was Brother Sundress at the show because I was wearing a sundress. But then there was Brother Mask was behind me. Ryan was Brother Lanyard. So it is just bulk of this performance is improv to the nth best degree. Annie and Veronica, astonishing improvisers. But essentially it's two monks. The stage space is you've got a big barrel at the back. that Veronica appears out of. We don't even think there's a body in there, but a human pops out of it at the beginning. Then there's like a little canister of lentils and like some old monk books. And basically the whole crux of the piece of these two monks that have the day off to do nothing, the sacred nothing, to just go out into the fields and visit the donkey. But they're obsessed with this, with this notion of doing nothing. Like they're excited about it, and they bring the audience into like, let's do nothing together. So they hand us all little lentils to kind of be in on the little bits. And then throughout the whole piece, there's this like monastery gong that sort of, so basically we're segued from like absurdist piece to absurdist piece, which I'll get into the specificity of that, but it's broken up by this like monastery gong that has both of them freeze and then pivot to the next bit. So you could tell there's like this stress, this overarching like stress of routine, of work, like just creeping up upon them. And then each absurdist bit is them like to the nth degree, like they talk about how they have to count all of the lentils, but there's no possible way that they can count all of the lentils. And they just go absolutely insane, like on all fours, like on their backs, like just going absolutely wild. A storm ensues as one of the absurdist bits where they trash the entire stage. They go up into the audience. They're spraying spray bottles. It is insane. And then they're looking for their donkey. And what do you know? These two performers become a donkey. Veronica has the head, Annie is the body, and it's just this prolonged, too long, deliciously too long version of them just prancing about the space as a donkey. And then the donkey goes missing in a bit. And they're like, where is my ass? Have you seen my ass? And then they, again, this deliciously too long bit of asking audience members, if you see my ass, grab it. If you see my ass, ride it.
Ride it into the net.
So it's also two like female presenting performers donning these monk costumes, obsessed with the idea of doing nothing, but they are trapped in this world where they're constantly being shook up, either by like having to do work, by external forces. It's just, there's so much commentary you could just like throw on this piece that on the surface level is just hilarious. They bring out pieces of bread to give to the audience, but then they go, do we have any brothers, like any celiacs in the house? And I'm gluten intolerant. So I raise my hand. They go, oh, brother Sundress, we have something for you. They bring a whole vine of grapes, and I like eat a grape off of the vine from Annie's hand. No one else raises their hand eating these grapes. So guess what? Jill got to munch on a whole vine of grapes for the rest of the show. Grapes. Like everyone was hooting and hollering. And then the best part is nearing the end of the piece, we get mulled down to discussing the idea and the beauty of doing nothing. And who, when you think of doing the blessed act of nothing with, who do you want to do that with? And they both share, they look at each other and they say, like, I would love no one more to like do nothing with. Like, you are the person I want to do nothing with. And both of these performers get so emotional. And then, you know, they're going to do it. They look to the audience and they're like, who do you love doing nothing with? And you have people say like, my mom, or like people specifically name their friends. I courageously that day, I guess I was super self-confident. I was like, myself. But I said it and I was like, oh my gosh, I guess that is true. And it was so emotional, and just what a way of like bringing the audience in, just like insanity ensues, comedy. And then we're pendulum swinging to the other drama mask of like hitting the heartstrings and having you contemplate this idea, who do you want to do nothing with? And again, the audience it was like they were holding the audience by the reins, holding them by the hands. And then like this sort of like very emotional moment was like a hug, like a warm hug. It was wild. It was like I was laughing, and then crying. That's my appraisal and a synopsis. I don't know, Ryan, you want to add?
Yeah.
Brother Lanyard.
Brother Lanyard, take it away.
Yeah. So Monks is divine. Monks is just the best kind of chaos. This show, okay, I will say, the minorest of critiques. Just as they care about Brother Celiac's gluten intolerance, this show should come with a content warning, I guess, for people with legume allergies, because you get everybody in the audience gets a handful of lentils upon arrival.
True, yeah.
And like that might seem like an obscure allergy, but peanuts and lentils come from the same family, so a lot of people with peanut allergies also have lentil, chickpea, fava bean allergies too. So just putting that out there, if you're ever remounting this show, maybe make that. It's unfortunate that people will be excluded from the show for that reason, but you can't get rid of the lentils. The lentils are so perfect in it. We spent the whole first half of the show before we realized what the lentils even were, just sitting there holding raw lentils in our hands. And throughout the entire first half, we're all just sitting there, you hear pitter patter of lentils falling out of people's hands, and that's just part of the accidental, yet definitely not accidental soundscape of this show. And until eventually we find out what the lentils are for. They're for counting, of course, and throwing at the stage. Yeah, the entire donkey bit, I just had the biggest dumb grin on my face the whole time. They're just prancing about the stage in their donkey costume. It puts every production of Midsummer I've ever seen to shame. It's so much of the humor of this piece is just things go on for so long that you think they should stop being funny, but then they keep going on for so long that they become funny again.
Well, it's the Family Guy thing.
Well, it does the Family Guy thing better than Family Guy in so many ways. It's this durational absurdity is the name of the game, and it's so good. It's so well pulled off. It's
just when you think it doesn't get better, Annie quite literally as the body of the donkey shows her own bare ass, and Veronica has a tail and picks a brother out of the audience to literally tie on a donkey tail to a piece of string that is in between Annie's butt cheeks. Yeah. That's where we go on that, and it is hilarious.
So there was a lot of conversation with the recent Tim Hortons musical about, I guess a lot of people seem to think that show was going to save theater from its downward spiral, or maybe signal a new direction that theater is going. It didn't succeed. Yes, the Timbit musical did not succeed in that. Sorry to all the talented people who worked on it. Monks, I think, if you want a window into what a future generation of theater in Canada looks like.
Yeah.
Monks, I think, I look at this show and I'm like, I loved every moment of this. My parents would hate this show. They would and nothing against them or their senses of humor, but this is not a show for them. And I think in many ways it is a bit of a generational line in the sand. I don't think there was anybody in my audience over the age of 40. And I'm not saying people of an older generation wouldn't or can't connect with this. I know I spent a lot of time talking with Karen Fricker about this and she adored it. But I do think, it is very much on the pulse of what our generation and younger wants from theater, what expects from theater. And I don't expect every play to be like this, but I do think it is a Rosetta Stone for what theater can be and how it can
definitely
cater to the audience that will outlive the subscriber-based audiences that are no longer able to sustain the values that old school models of theater and subscriptions and funding, is clearly on its way out. And I implore people. There was a lot of higher ups at Soul Pepper in the audience that I attended, so I hope maybe they have some programming decisions in mind. I believe Annie was part of the Soul Pepper Academy, one of them was telling me. So it makes sense that they went out to support her, but I'd like to see this program. We've said that about quite a few shows, but this needs to be programmed somewhere. And one last thing I need to say, because one of the new young reviewers from Intermission's new young reviewer program, Katie Thorne, in her piece on this show, she made a very astute point that also occurred to me when she compared this piece to Waiting for Godot, which I think is definitely apt, but it actually only tells half the story. This is the anti-Waiting for Godot, that it's not anticipating someone's arrival. They're celebrating the absence of the abbot. Their boss is gone, so they get to do the things that they can't do when he's here. And Vladimir and Estragon in Waiting for Godot are condemned to doing nothing, whereas these characters want nothing more than to do nothing. That in this kind of rise and grind hyper-capitalist mentality, doing nothing actually sounds pretty desirable. It would be nice if we could, but unfortunately we have to get to work. I mean, we get to work, as they put it. We have to kind of condition ourselves to think that work is its own reward. But it's like, there's just like this play completely recasts the existential ennui that we think of a play about doing nothing as the greatest torture of a world unmoored from its own identity. But this, wouldn't it be great if we could just lie back, enjoy the sun, sit under the shade, not have to count lentils, and just ride your ass into the night?
Yeah. Well, that's also just like an actor's dream. Like, it's like we have all these side jobs that we have to do to keep up what we want to actually be doing. So like, I could just also see that layer in there too, of the like getting the counter and counting all of the lentil. That's like, having to go into like, if you have like a dreaded side job, like, like
you don't have to get to work, you get to work.
Yes.
You have the privilege of laboring for someone else. Oh my God, this show.
Astonishing.
So fun.
Yes.
That's Monks, everybody. Monks. If they remount this, go see
Monks.
Hey,
where are the monks?
Hey, where are the monks? Gallivant.
Yeah. There you go. Thank you, Ryan.
And on that note, that rounds us out.
That rounds us out for Fringe 2024. What was that, Ryan? 42?
I think
41 shows?
I think 40 exactly, actually.
40 shows exactly on the dot.
Yay.
That
Thank
was
you
it.
all
That was all of us.
so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all for tuning in and watching. Thank you to these wonderful companies, performers, directors, writers, programmers, managers, intimacy coaches, lighting designers, all the teams. You pulled off another great season. There was lots of juicy, wonderful, rich content in here for everybody to feast on and enjoy. And we cannot wait to do this again next July.
I need you two to do me a favor and remind me to see less shows next year.
Yes.
Ryan, I'm putting a restriction on you.
We will pace ourselves accordingly.
I love Fringe. It is my Christmas, but I saw too much this year. I'm not going to lie.
Ryan burnt himself out.
He had too much at the Christmas buffet. Yeah.
Yes. Sleepy after the turkey dinner.
That's right. But before we go, let's all give our classic sign-offs. Ryan, where can people follow you if they want to? Because I know sometimes you like to plug them this time around.
With Fringe roundups, I feel like I was pretty positive on this one, but I sometimes say contentious things. So please don't shout at Cup of Hemlock if you disagree with anything I say. You can direct that to me personally via Instagram, which I never use, but I check sometimes, at Ryan Borochovitz. It's just my first and last name, all one word. I'll put the link to my intermission coverage that I also wrote on 10 shows from the festival, some of the ones we talked about here, but also many of my very talented colleagues covered so many shows, almost all of them in that big, long document. So I encourage people to check that out. And follow Cup of Hemlock at COH Theater, yada, yada, do all the things. Like, share, subscribe.
Wonderful. Jill?
Yeah, folks can follow my artist Instagram account, Jillian.Robinson96, if you want to keep up with all my antics and see what I got going on. At time of this episode release, I will be making my way up to Muskoka to do some concert series with Timberbeast Productions and the lovely Autumn Smith. So that'll be my summer nights in August, bountiful with music. So keep posted for stuff like that. And that's about it on my end. Mac, how about you?
Follow me at Mackenzie Horner, all social media platforms. You can also follow all my musical antics over at Before the Downbeat Musical Podcast. We are in the midst of getting final things prepped for next season. So if you haven't caught up on this season where we introduced 2 new co-hosts, then please check it on out. We have lots of great content there. You also can check out Jill and Ryan's episodes where Jill got to watch Little Shop of Horrors. Ryan got to summarize Gallivant. Jill's also come on for a few other episodes. Ryan and I did Fiddler on the Roof. There's lots of goody musical content there if you have gotten enough of our voices already. So there you go. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we will see you all in Fringe 2025.
And sooner.
Cheers. And sooner. Yes. Thanks. Bye.